Okay, so before we do get started, there's going to be like 3 or 4 things that we must talk about. Hopefully when people are watching this video back, they don't skip this part. But this is going to be a PvE based list, not going to talk about PvP whatsoever. And maybe I mention it, but it's not going to be ranked as such. The criteria is based on how useful a weapon is. Therefore, a weapon might be really good, but if there's another weapon that outclasses it, it's going to be lower in the list, right? And I'm just going to rank all 250 melee-based weapons. So I'm not going to talk about the crossbows, the bows, the spell catalysts, none of those things. It's just going to be the weapons. It's going to be hard to like try and compare those things together. So just to make it simple, just going to talk about these weapons. And most importantly, everything that I'm going to be talking about is off the dome, off the top of my head. So therefore, take it with a grain of salt. I mean, you can still trust what I'm saying, obviously, because, you know, I've played with all of these weapons very extensively. I pretty much have like complete playthroughs with almost every single one here. So I know what I'm talking about, really. But the reason why I mentioned that is that there might be some things that I forget. Well, obviously when I do my ranking types of videos, it's like more edited and it's going to be like more knowledgeable in most cases. But yeah, there'll be times where like I'll probably watch this video back and be like, oh, I should have said this and this instead of this and this. So yeah, kind of stuff like that. But the reason why we're doing this now and not like, you know, months ago is because, one, fun to do on stream, and we can like look back at this moment like 3 months from now and be like, hey, look at how the meta was compared to how it is like, you know, with all these new weapons and all these new updates. But yes, lots of yapping ahead. Anyway, with the daggers, before I start about talking every new weapon class, I'm just going to give my overall thoughts and opinions on them, and then I'll just continue to rank them. But yeah, for the daggers, my thoughts on these is that they're good secondary-based options. They're not really good as like a primary-based option because, one, their damage and DPS not that good. Stagger potential, their stance damage, not going to be that high. But they're good secondary options because they're really light. You can just throw them into your back pocket. You can put a bunch of different Ashes of War onto them, like Golden Bow, Chilling Mist, Poisonous Mist, Shared Order, all these things. And they get good critical damage. So, if you could get like a poise break or a parry, switch to the dagger, high amounts of critical damage. The regular dagger. A tier. Very useful because, one, I think it's like the lightest dagger or tied for the lightest dagger. It gets like the lowest requirements. You get it right at the beginning. You could put things like Golden Vow, any other secondary Ashes of War into them. Really useful. Parrying dagger. Probably the C tier. The only use of the parrying dagger is that it is meant to like parry enemies. Because I think when you put parry on the parrying dagger, it gets more parry frames than like all the other types of weapons. But it still doesn't get as much parry frames as things like shields do. So using things like golden parry or counter retaliation will just get you way more. So, and parrying itself is not going to be that useful because like stance breaking gives you like a very similar reward and not many enemies can be parried. I think the parrying dagger does get like one of the highest dexterity scalings, but even then it's going to be outclassed by a lot of other things if you were to use it as a primary option. The mystery cord. Oh, pretty high A tier. It is going to be the best critical weapon in the entire game with 140 crit. Does get a very decent dexterity scaling, but like it gets higher base damage. So like with almost every single type of like infusion, it's going to perform really well. And any single time you get a stance break or a parry, just switching to a mystery cord is just going to benefit in most cases. I'll put it into the S tier. It's really good. Anyway, the Great Knife. The Great Knife and the Bloodstained Dagger are like very similar. They're both bleed-based daggers. One's for dexterity in the Great Knife, one's for strength in the Bloodstained Dagger. I think the Great Knife I'd probably value more because in most cases, if you're going to be going with a dagger build, you're going to be using dexterity. But even then, as a primary-based option, I wouldn't really value them that much because they're still daggers. Not going to stagger well, not going to be high poise damage. Things like claws and curved swords are just going to outclass these weapon classes or these weapons like by a lot. Like if you want to go with a bleed-based build at close range, just use claws or use like a curved sword. It's going to be so much better. The Earthsteel Dagger though is going to be one of the few or like only one that actually is going to be a very solid like primary-based option. Because one, it does get a unique heavy attack and a cool double swipe, and it actually comes out like almost just as fast as like a regular dagger heavy attack, but it just swings twice, going to be doing more damage. And it's unique in the fact that it gets a faith scaling and can be infused. So when you actually go into a Faith Infusion, it kind of doubles down into that Faith stat. Specifically with like a Flame Art Infusion, it performs really well. Get high amounts of damage. So those heavy attack builds can be really nice. But it still is a dagger, so you're going to suffer from like dagger range. But actually is pretty good. Put it into the A tier as well. The Wakizashi, this one actually is going to have the highest amount of base damage compared to all of the other daggers. Unfortunately, it only gets 100 crits, where like most other daggers get at least 110. It does get passive bleed as well, which is pretty cool. So typically it might be better than one of these options. But the crit kind of like makes it lack, and you can't be power stance with other daggers. It can only be power stance with the katanas, which the point of that is because you can use parrying, or you can use dagger types of Asher's War, like parry. But as you mentioned, parrying is not that useful, so I'll probably put it into this C tier. It's going to be one of like the better primary options, maybe, but like it's still a dagger. If you want a blade-based short weapon, just use a claw. Okay. The Celebrant's Sickle. Trash. This thing, all the Celebrant weapons are just beyond dog shit. These things do really bad damage, have like nothing going for them. The only thing that they have unique is that they can get like runes per hit. It's like 10 runes for every single hit, which is beyond terrible. Like, just kill some sheep and you get more runes in this thingy. This is awful. And it gets a 0.5% drop rate. 0.5. Ivory Sickle. Oh my god. Even worse. Thing gets like a magic, it gets like, and with, I think this one can be infused. This one cannot be infused. Gets stuck with Quick Step, gets like a descaling in magic. Why does this even exist? What is the purpose of this thing? I don't even know. Crystal Knife is like a slight bit less trash version of the Ivory Sickle. It gets more damage. It still gets Quick Step. You can't infuse it. It still gets split magic damage. But I think it's like a B scaling in intelligence compared to like this one getting a D scaling or a C. So it's just going to be better, but it's still a dagger that can't be infused. That just gets very mediocre damage. The Scorpion Stinger. Okay, so Scorpion Stinger, just going to be average damage. It does get Scarlet Rot though. Can't be infused. Does get stuck with Repeating Thrust. The most annoying thing about all these Scarlet Rot type of weapons is that none of them have unique Ashes of War. There's not a single Scarlet Rot Ash of War in the entire game, and that's really annoying. Repeating Thrust is not too bad. It's going to be good at proccing these status effects, like this one has Scarlet Rot, so it's going to be pretty cool. But it would have been much better if it had a unique skill, or like a different type of scaling, maybe if it scaled off Arcane, and if Scarlet Rot scaled off Arcane, it would have been cool, but just dexterity based, average damage. And the thing is, Scarlet Rot is pretty cool, so I'm going to put it into the B tier. But the spell-based versions of Scarlet Rot are like just way better. Like this is like 15% damage compared to like the spell-based versions getting 30%, which yeah, that's like night and day, but it's still pretty useful though. But there are other Scarlet Rot type of weapons that I probably value a bit more. The Syndicator. Oh boy, another weapon, another dagger that can't be infused, that gets stuck with Quick Step and basically has nothing unique going for it. It does get like some of the highest base damage, but it can't be infused. So like basically all of the other ones that can be infused can just out damage it. The only thing that it has going for it that's a bit different is that it can boost your bestial incantations by 10%. But so can the Claw Mark Seal. So if you're going to go with a Faith type of build, you're better off just offhanding the Claw Mark Seal because that just weighs less. But if you have a Strength type of build that's using the Claw Mark Seal, then you're going to be putting this one in your main hand to use the spells. But this is not going to be a good primary-based option compared to a lot of other strength-based weapons. So you're only going to be switching to this thing if you want to like just use the bestial spell. So it's like very, very niche. So I think a lower C tier for the Syndicator. Anyway, Glintstone Chris. Boom, S tier, best dagger in the game. The best dagger in the game. This thing is really, I kind of put it into broken, but it's not that broken. But its projectile does really stupid damage. I think it's only like 9 or 10. I think it's like 10 FP for the projectile part, and you can fully charge it. Pair that alongside the Godfrey's icon. It just goes stupid distances, does stupid damage. It's really good. You don't even need to use a follow-up attack, and the follow-up is actually still pretty good. I think it's like only like 5 FP. Lunges pretty far, does some decent amount of stance damage too. But you can just literally just spam the projectile the entire time. And for only 10 FP, I don't think there's any other like projectile that hits as hard for that much FP cost. It's really good. But it still suffers from being a dagger, so I don't think I can put it anything higher than the S tier. Reduvia. I'm going to put this one into the lower A tier. Yeah, okay, we talk about the Reduvia so much. Let's talk about it again one more time. So, Reduvia is going to be a really solid early game option because Bloodblade is obviously really good. Or Reduvia Bloodblade at least, the weapon skill. Does some really nice damage, does proc bleed incredibly quickly, but the only reason why I would put it at the A tier and not the S tier is because that the regular Bloodblade Ash of War is just going to be better. It can do more damage with like an Occult Infusion with an Arcane build. You can get more Blood Loss build up, and with paired alongside things like a Katana or a Curved Sword, and using them like at point blank range, it can just destroy everything way faster than the Reduvia ever could. The only downside of the Bloodblade Ash of War is that it does take away your health, but it's only on the first initial cast, whereas Reduvia doesn't take away health at all, hence why it's going to be a better early game type of option. You do get it early game, but yeah, the Bloodblade Ash of War does decrease like half the amount of FP, like half the stamina cost as well, and it can just do more poise damage and more damage depending on what weapon they actually pair it alongside with. So I think Bloodblade just outclasses it because you can just put it on better weapons, but it's still going to serve as a nice early game option. And Bloodblade Ash of War does scale just off Arcane, whereas this one actually does scale off Dexterity and Arcane, so there are some uses, but yeah, I think it's still going to be outclassed for the most part. Anyway, Blade of Calling. Probably the B tier. The thing is, like, it's going to be the exact same thing as the Black Knife, but the Black Knife is just going to be better with its skill. They're both going to be faith-based options. One gets a slightly better Dexterity scaling, one gets a slightly better Faith scaling. I think this one gets a better Faith scaling. The Ash of War is basically identical in terms of the animation. They both get infinite hyper armor. They both go pretty far. Both going to be doing holy damage, which yes is going to be a downside if you watch today's video. But this one is going to get percentile damage over time. I'm going to get a Destined Death effect, which means that it's going to get that 10% HP nerf and get a bunch of damage over time on top of that. So it's going to be like way more damage compared to the Blade of Calling. It does consume like about 5 more FP, I think it is. But the Blade of Calling does have the benefit of sending enemies flying. So against smaller enemies, it does have better knockback. So like it knocks them to the ground, whereas the Black Knife does not do that. And it does more initial damage. So like up front, it's going to do more. But when you take into account the percentile damage that Black Knife gets, it's just going to be better. And this actually does consume less FP, so I'll probably put it lower B tier because it still is a projectile attack that is very easy to use. But I think the Black Knife is going to be better. And yeah, Black Knife weapon skill spam is just OP. Like you can just spam this skill over and over again, melt every single boss in the game, and it is very easy. Anyway, those are the daggers. Getting into the straight swords. Straight swords are an amazing weapon class. Really solid attacks, good variety in attacks, really quick. The power sensing combos are extremely powerful because they hit simultaneously. They're just a really solid overall weapon class. They get things, really good Ash of War options, like Square Off, which can result in like really high amounts of stance damage. Starting off with the short sword, right? This is the short sword? Yeah, short sword. C tier, average damage, average range. I think it gets like a slightly unique heavy attack, but I'm pretty sure it's still a poke. So, yeah, we'll throw this one to the C tier because there's no real reason to use a short sword over anything else. Long sword, I'll give this one a solid A tier. The thing is, this actually is going to be the best dexterity-based straight sword in the game in terms of like the ones that can be infused. I mean, probably just in general, best dexterity-based. At higher levels, this one actually gets more damage than like almost everything else. Like a 60 dexterity, 80 dexterity, the longsword actually outclasses everything else. I think even like the Noble Slender Sword and the Warhawk Talon. But the thing is, people don't really use the longsword that much. And I wouldn't really use it that much myself because I'd rather have like the 110 crits that some of the other things have, or like the unique movesets that some have as well. But being that power sensing straight swords is very solid, you could probably put this one into the offhand, and it's pretty nice. So yeah, solid A tier for the longsword. The broadsword, it does actually get the most amount of damage compared to all the other straight swords. Highest base damage, but the trade-off being is that it gets the worst range. It's going to be strength based, which when you're using straight swords and you want to use multiple of them, most of them are going to be dexterity based here. So you're kind of limited if you want to power stance. And it gets the worst heavy attack too. It gets that stupid horizontal swipe for a heavy attack, which the poking attack is like infinitely better to have. The broadsword heavy attack in Dark Souls 3 was really good, but they just kind of nerfed it in this game for some reason. So I'm just going to put it into the B tier. Probably high B tier because it still gets the highest amount of base damage, but I wouldn't really like ever use it, like, because the other ones have way more range, and I'd rather sacrifice like 10 points in AR just to have more range and probably higher crit damage as well and have a better moveset. I think those are more useful. Weathered Straight Sword is complete hot garbage. Terrible. Don't know why it exists. There's like so many useless straight swords in this game, and this is just one of them. It's just going to be like a worse version of almost everything else here. Terrible damage, terrible range. I think it's just as bad a range as the broadsword, and it gets the same shitty heavy attack. Yeah, this thing should just not exist. The Lord Swan Straight Sword though, boom, S tier. S tier for the Lord Swan Straight Sword. It gets the, I think it's the second highest base damage, like just a couple points less than the broadsword. And the fact that you have really high base damage means that it's going to pair really nicely with like almost every single infusion. And it gets 110 crits as well. So when paired alongside things like Square Off, you're going to stance break pretty quickly. And then he's going to get really high amounts of crit damage. It's just going to be like the best straight sword to have as lower levels with almost every single infusion. I think things like the Longsword and Nobles and Warhawk Talon might outclass it once you get to like 40 plus dexterity. In most cases, the Lord Swan Straight Sword is going to be really good. Noble Slender Sword. Should I put it at the S tier as well? Because like, there's not really much of a point. Put it high A tier. Actually, no, there's more range. I'll put it as the S tier. Put it here. I might change this up. There's actually a lot of things in the S tier. Put it in A. Anyway. The Noble Slender Sword is basically the exact same thing as a Longsword Straight Sword or Lord Swan Straight Sword. It just gets less damage, gets a bit more range, but it gets better scaling. So once you get to about like 40 or 60 dexterity, then it actually starts to outdamage the Lord Swan Straight Sword. But with almost every infusion, the Lord Swan Straight Sword is just going to be better. I'll put it into the S tier because Kane's Sword. Trash. This is the worst straight sword in the entire game. One of the worst weapons in the entire game. Purely because that every other straight sword is just better. This thing is beyond terrible. And it looks really cool. And that upsets me greatly. But yeah, this thing is literally just the lowest amount of base damage. Some of the worst scalings out of all the straight swords. Gets some of the worst range, if not the worst range. And it gets the shitty ass horizontal swipe for a heavy attack as well. That's kind of cringe. Don't like that. Warhawk Talon. I'll also put it into the A tier. I put it into like a lower A tier. Yeah, so this thing actually does get just as much damage as the Noble Slender Sword. Like basically the exact same damage, same scalings, everything. But the difference being is that this one does get 110 crits and it gets more range. But this one actually does get a unique heavy attack and a cool double swipe. So the heavy attack is actually pretty cool. It is going to like do more damage than a regular heavy attack. It is going to do like, is going to be a longer animation. So it might be more situational. Does get a nice lunge. But the thing is, when you're speccing into like a heavy attack build, it's probably because you want to stance break more. And like Square Off or kind of already does that for you. So I don't know, maybe I'll put a B tier. And I'll put a lower A tier. Lower A tier. Anyway, the Lazuli Glintstone Sword. Oh my god, look at this shit. Look how bad this is. This is so bad. Anyway, this is a magic-based weapon with a D-scaling in intelligence and a non-unique skill in Glintstone Pebble, which Glintstone Pebble is fine, but being that it gets a D-scaling in intelligence, it's going to be a really shit version of Glintstone Pebble. Just put Glintstone Pebble onto any other straight sword, it would just be a better weapon. Also, it does get a heavy attack that has blocking frames, which it could be kind of cool, but like the blocking frame heavy attack is just a longer animation than like a regular heavy attack, and the block itself is not even a good block. So that's a D tier. Actually, you know what? Trash. The Carrion Knight Sword is basically just a slightly... It's like the exact same thing, but instead of having Glintstone Pebble, it gets Carrion Grandeur. And Carrion Grandeur is obviously a much better skill, but it still gets a D-scaling in intelligence. It's another magic weapon with a D-scaling in intelligence. Awful. It still gets the same blocking frame heavy attack, which is like almost useless. The Crystal Sword... is another magic weapon with a descaling in intelligence and a non-unique weapon skill in spinning slash. Don't know why it doesn't at least get square off, but the only purpose of this weapon is that it's a good, well, not good, but it's an early game option that can be infused or can be buffed, upgraded with Somber Stones. That's like the only benefit that it has, because you're better off just going with any other straight sword with a magic infusion, and it will just do more damage, and you could put an actual good weapon skill onto it. So yeah. The Rotten Crystal Sword, another magic straight sword with a descaling in intelligence. This one actually does get Scarlet Rot though, which is actually somewhat useful. So C tier. But still, it's just terrible damage. And the thing is, Scarlet Rot doesn't actually scale with anything in this game. So you're gonna have pretty bad, what do you call it? Scarlet Rot build up. It's gonna be pretty slow. It's like 50 or 60 Scarlet Rot build up, and it takes a while to actually proc. So yeah, and the spell-based Scarlet Rot versions are just always going to be better. But Scarlet Rot's still good. 15% damage for like 90 seconds. It's nice, but you're going to have a non-unique skill and pretty bad damage. Being that we're talking about like magic-based weapons with a descaling and intelligence, we might as well talk about the Saint Trainer's Sword. Another one, descaling and intelligence. This thing does get sleep, so it is like a little bit more useful. But the thing is, like, sleep is not that useful. Like, a lot of enemies and bosses are immune to it, and if they're not immune, they just highly resist and they only get staggered, which is still cool to have. It's better than nothing. But the trade-off being with this weapon is that you just get shitty damage and a skill that doesn't really do anything. It just buffs the weapon with just more sleep. If the skill actually did like a cool like Sacred Blade version, but just magic damage instead, it would be more useful. I don't know why we just had to take a hit for damage because it gets sleep. That was kind of annoying. So I'll probably just put it into the C tier. Hopefully we get like an actual good sleep-based Ash of War in the DLC that actually does respectable damage, because like sleep would actually be pretty decent there. But I'm not going to like want to sacrifice really good damage just to proc sleep, because there are other status effects in the game, other weapons in the game that proc status effects and actually get to good weapon skills. I would gladly sacrifice all of these stupid descaling straight swords just to have one blade straight sword. That'd be great. I'm not going to talk to you guys at all. I'm going to ignore you guys the entire time. Don't ask me questions. I'm focusing on doing this. Okay, McKillen Knight Sword. We went from the magic-based straight sword with the descalings and intelligence. Now we have the holy-based straight sword with a descaling and intelligence and a non-unique skill. D tier. It gets a descaling in like strength, dexterity, and faith. Like, it is just awful. And it gets stuck with Sacred Blade, and obviously you have descaling and faith with a skill that scales off faith. Not going to be doing good damage. The only cool thing about it is that it does get a unique heavy attack and a cool lunge. I'm not sure if I like it more than the regular standing heavy attack that does a poke instead. But the lunge is pretty cool. It does cover some nice distances, but like, yeah, it's the descalings across the board. Why would I want that? But now talk about holy-based weapons. Might as well talk about the Golden Epitaph. Like, the only reason you would ever use these weapons is because they look cool, which is what I did in my first playthrough. I used these two. You get these like right at the end of the game as well. I mean, not this one, but the McKillen Knight Sword you do. The Golden Epitaph is a slight bit more useful, so I'll put it into like the C tier. Put it like higher C tier. Put it here. And the reason why it's more useful, despite it still doing bad damage and still doing holy damage, is that its weapon skill Last Rites actually does make you do more damage against undead enemies. I think it's like 100% more damage, and it just outright kills skeletons. It's kind of like the Shared Order Ash of War, but just better. It still has like lower requirements, so you can just use it for the skill, or use it for the buff, and you just do way more damage against undead enemies, kill skeletons, and you could use it with any type of build, so it's actually pretty good. But as a primary based option, no, it's not good. The Ornamental Straight Sword. This is actually going to be a very solid early game option because, one, it's Somber based, and you can upgrade it just once, and you can power stance. So you have to upgrade 2 different weapons to power stance. And power stancing straight sword combo is really good. And being that it's actually a power stance by itself, with this two-handed, you actually get an extended moveset. So you get running heavy attacks and running light attacks and jumping heavy attacks and jumping light attacks, which is pretty cool. But the unique thing about this thing is its skill, that it actually does boost, give it a bit more holy damage. Not more holy damage. It just gives it holy damage because the weapon is pure physical. It's like plus 80 holy damage, and it changes its heavy attacks into a cool flurrying attack, which the flurry attack can be buffed with a bunch of different things like the Jellyfish Shield, Axe Talisman, the multi-hit talismans, and it can just output a lot of damage, but it's such a long animation and it doesn't stagger those smaller enemies. So it's like very situational, but gets a decent dexterity scaling. And with all the correct buffs, and if you have an opening, this thing can actually just melt a lot of enemies. So I put it into a lower A tier. If like the actual like flurrying attack actually staggered those smaller enemies and like did a whole stun locking thing, I'd probably like it a bit more, but it just doesn't really do that. So it's kind of unfortunate. But like the uncharged heavy attack is very quick though, so you can just spam that the entire time. It's pretty nice. Pretty nice. I might change it. I don't know, we're going to rearrange this whole thing at the end. Either way, what I'm saying is going to have merit and not really where I rank these things. Anyway, the regalia of the Ochad. That's what I call it. I don't care what anybody says. S tier. This thing is going to be very similar to the Mariah's Executioner Sword with its skill. What do you call it? The Ochad's Dancing Blade. For like 15 FP, you can just like fuck up everything in the entire game. But you're gonna need like a lot of certain types of buffs to make that happen. If you don't have things like the Godfrey's Icon, the multi-hit talismans, or the Thorny Cracks tier, the damage is not going to be that good. But it does still get decent damage either way. The one thing that I like about it more so than the Mariah's is that it is a straight sword. So when you power stand straight swords, you can proc the multi-hit talismans before using the skill, and it can be pretty nice. So yeah, I think it sits comfortably into the S tier. I don't know whereabouts. We'll go rearrange this at the end, but it is definitely going to be an S tier. Hopefully we get like a nice arcane-based weapon straight sword on the DLC to power sense with the regalia. Maybe like a blade-based straight sword. That'd be cool. Make it occult infused. Coated sword. S tier right at the top. Okay, so yes, holy damage, kind of cringe, but holy damage actually, but the coated sword does pure holy damage, meaning not split damage. It's not going through two different types of defenses. It is going to get a pure faith scaling and pure faith requirements. That means there's no requirements in any other stats. So the damage is actually going to be really nice. It's obviously going to be a very solid pairing alongside pure faith builds. If you're just going to go caster and just go spam a bunch of spells, you don't have to go spec into any other stats. You can just go all into faith. It's not that heavy as well. Actually gets respectable range. But the best part about the skill is going to be the fact that it's, the best part about the weapon is going to be its skill. Unblockable Blade. It goes like super far, really quick animation, solid horizontal spread. It goes like past like a 180-degree radius. And it does a lot of damage and like 35 stance damage, which is just stupid. Like 35 stance damage is like more so than like a charged heavy attack than you get with a straight sword. And it does it in such a wide spread. It's just, yeah, it's really good. Anyway, Sword of Knights and Flame, the last straight sword. Broken. Yeah, this thing does stupid damage. Does stupid damage. Better than Square Off. It doesn't do as much as Square Off, but I think it is a better skill than Square Off, yeah. In terms of stance damage. Because it's quicker. Anyway, yeah, Sword of Knight and Flame is broken. This thing does ridiculous damage. It doesn't matter. You don't even need to spec into much intelligence and faith to really benefit. And there's thousands of buffs to help boost it to make these things like 1 or 2 shot most bosses. The fact that it is faith and intelligence and like your only faith and intelligence weapon in the game, it's going to make it have good synergy with those types of spells or incantations and sorcery. So you can use a bunch of different things across all the spell categories and you can benefit greatly. But yeah, the damage output is just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. I've made plenty of videos talking about it. It's dumb. Anyway, the Great Swords. Okay, so the Great Swords, very solid weapon category. They have good variety in their movesets. The thing is, like, the way I like to talk about Great Swords is that they do everything really good, but they don't do anything the best. So, like, they have good movesets, they have good variation of movesets, but probably not the best in those things. They get good stance damage, but like not the best stance damage. Like even like hammers can get more stance damage than this. They have really good Ash of War options, but like all of the Ash of War options are probably not best paired with a Great Sword. So things like Lion's Claw, Giant Hunt, maybe things like Flaming Strike, they're always going to be better with other types of weapons, more so than a Great Sword. But like the versatility that Great Swords have is going to be their selling point. But to start off with, the Bastard Sword, there is like almost no reason to use the Bastard Sword. I think it gets like just as much damage as the Claymore. But the Claymore is just always going to be better because heavy attacks are just better. Or the poking heavy attack is just going to be better. So, C tier. Does look cool though, but yeah, C tier. Claymore, S tier. This thing gets like, doesn't get like the most damage out of all the Great Swords, but it gets some of the most damage. But the poking heavy attack is just insane. Like, piercing damage is the best damage type in this game. Counter attack damage is just kind of cracked, and the fact that you can do it with a heavy attack is always going to be really good, because heavy attacks typically come out faster, go further. Yeah, and you can pair it alongside the Spear Talisman to just make it do even more damage. Your charged heavy attack Claymore builds are just really good. It does come passively with Lion's Claw as well, so you don't actually have to go grab the actual Ash of War, just the benefit of using Lion's Claw. So that's like another positive that it has. But yeah, like Claymore is going to be one of the best greatswords, purely because of that heavy attack. I'd rather sacrifice like a little bit damage just to get a better moveset, and this Claymore is just a pure example of this. The Iron Greatsword, which is going to be your highest damaging greatsword in the game. I didn't think I'd ever really use this over the Claymore, because obviously I'd rather have that cool heavy attack, because having piercing damage and having more variation in moveset is what I'm going to like more. Unless I was going with a build that just spammed weapon skills, because if you're going to go with a build that spams weapon skills, then the Iron Greatsword is going to be the best greatsword for that. But as I was saying before, being that greatswords don't actually have the best synergy with those things. Like, if you wanted to spam things like Lion's Claw, you're always going to be better than using it with a Colossal Sword, right? Maybe it's probably the best when you pair it alongside things like Impaling Thrust. Not sure if that's better with this or like a Halberd or whatnot. So I put it into like the A tier. So like, it does everything well, but like, I'm not sure. There's not really many builds of which I would benefit, but like, it's just like a solid, reliable weapon that you can't really go wrong with. Yeah. Lord Swan Greatsword. Not as good though. Not as good. Gets like pretty mediocre damage, mediocre range, nothing really unique outside of the fact that it does get 110 crit. I'm probably put it into the B tier for that reason. The 110 crit is pretty nice, but like, there's not, I don't know. There's other things that can just do more crit. The motion values of the critical attacks with the greatswords aren't going to be that high, but yeah, the 110 crit is still pretty cool, but I still wouldn't really bother using it over a lot of the other greatswords that just get more damage in general and better movesets. So I pretty nicely into the B tier. It's pretty cool. The Knight's Greatsword and the Banished Knight's Greatsword are basically identical. They're just the exact same thing. I don't even know why they bother. I don't know why they actually bother with the... I don't know why they actually bother with the... I was trying to think. I got sidetracked for a second. Yeah, they're the exact same thing. They're the same light attack combos, which actually is a quicker light attack than like the regular greatswords, with like the mix up of like the horizontal swipe and the downward chops. Actually does get a few frames quicker than like regular greatswords, which is pretty cool. In a game where like your charged heavy attack builds and your weapon skill builds or weapon skill spamming builds are just going to be better in terms of performance, it might not be that useful, but it still is really good. Does get some pretty decent combos with its heavy attacks into the light attack combos. But yeah, both these things are the exact same thing. Like the Knight's Greatsword gets a bit more range, but less damage. And yeah, the Banished Knight's Sword is just more damage, but less range. I think like they weigh the exact same. Their scalings are similar. The requirements are similar as well. But yeah, very solid A2 weapons. I'm not sure if I like it better than the Iron Greatsword. I don't know. We'll rearrange it at the end. Anyway, the Forked Greatsword and the Flambeau, they're both blade-based greatswords. Difference being is that the Forked is best with strength. This one's best with dexterity. People are going to just value the Flambeau like in most cases because it does get more range. And I guess higher base damage as well. And it looks cooler. So yeah, Flambeau is really solid. I put it into the A tier. Trying to think if I put it, I don't know. I don't think I put it in the S tier. There's not many other like, see, when I'm going with like a blade-based build, there's not really many options that I really go with the Flambeau. Like there's a lot of blade weapons I'd rather use over the Flambeau, but it's still pretty good though. But yeah, the Forked Greatsword, I actually like the heavy attack a bit more because the Flambeau gets the horizontal swipe, whereas the Forked Greatsword gets the overhead slam when one-handed. But when you have it two-handed, it's going to be better to have. Well, it's the same thing though, right? Yeah, it's horizontal swipe when you're both one-handed and two-handed, whereas this one-handed gets the overhead slam, which is better for variation. But it just gets less damage and less range, so not going to value it as much. Put it into the B tier. The Gargoyle's Greatsword is just a shitty version of the Iron Greatsword. It's just like the same weight. That's another thing about the Iron Greatsword, it is the heaviest one too. But it's like basically like the same weight. I think it's a bit lighter, but just way less range. Not way less range, but like less range and just less damage. So like there's no point of this weapon existing because the Iron Greatsword is way better. The Gargoyle's Black Blade. This is the only gargoyle black weapon that actually does get a unique skill. In that it actually does do a little bit of damage over time. It's like a reskinned version of Vacuum Slice, but it just gets Black Flame instead. It doesn't get Destined Death. It actually looks like it gets Destined Death, but it's just a Black Flame damage. Don't know why it doesn't get Destined Death damage, which is just better. Because it's doing holy damage as well. So I don't know why it gets the Black Flame damage over time effect, which is kind of weird, but it still is damage over time, which is nice. But it does Scale of Faith, and it gets a descaling in Faith, which is kind of annoying as well. And it's just going to be outclassed by the Blasphemous Blade in almost like every single way. So I think the B tier is like the highest I can really put it. Like the only reason to use this weapon over the Blasphemous Blade is because you don't want to use the Blasphemous Blade. That's it. Because you just like don't want to get like the slack for using the Blasphemous Blade, like the best weapon in the game. You're just like, okay, I'm gonna be a slight bit different, but still use something similar. It still is like cheaper version, and it still has a quicker animation than Taker's Flame does with the Blasphemous Blade, but like obviously the damage and the health regen thing, not the same. The Inseparable Sword gets the exact same light attack combo as the Knights and the Banished Knights Greatsword, with its cool two-handed light attacks. But it does get split holy damage, gets a very decent strength and faith-based scaling. So I guess you can get really high amounts of AR. The problem is that it gets Sacred Blade as its weapon skill. But Sacred Blade is pretty good, but it's not unique. So putting Sacred Blade on other great swords could just be very similar. It's probably not going to do as much damage. So like if you did want to go with a Sacred Blade build, the Inseparable Sword might be like your best option. So I probably put it into like the B tier for that regard, but it should have had a unique skill. Like it should have had a unique skill. But it still gets a B scaling in Faith, so at least it's not a D scaling like you do get with some of these other things that have a skill scale with that particular stat. So it's going to be pretty respectable. It's nice. I don't mind it. But you should have had a unique skill. The Sword of Milos. This is going to be an option that you just use and you like your offhand, and you just use it as a secondary option, because as a primary based option, it's not going to be that good. The damage isn't that high. Just a strength and dexterity scaling. Can't infuse it. Cannot buff it. It does get passive bleed, which is pretty cool. But I don't think I'd ever use it over something like the Flamberge. If you just wanted to use it as a primary option. And its weapon skill does turn its heavy attacks into like a flowering attack, which is kind of similar to like a war cry. And the thing is, I don't really like a lot of those war cry based Ashes of War with certain weapon types like the Greatsword, because it's going to swing a whole bunch and it does the exact same stance damage, and you're just having like a longer animation. And in this game where stance breaking is really important, I want to do it faster and not do it longer and get stuck in a longer animation. But the benefit of the Sword of Milos is that the weapon skill actually debuffs enemies to make them take 15% more damage. And when you get kills of enemies, you get, I think it's like 5 FP for every single kill. So just having it in your offhand and just use it to debuff enemies and just leave it equipped, but not actually use it, is going to be like the benefit. It does look really cool as well, but yeah. I think a B tier, just because of its debuff, is pretty useful. Maybe A tier. Yeah. Like the only downside is that if you're going to constantly leave it equipped, it is going to be pretty heavy because it does like weigh 10 units. But it's still pretty cool. Anyway, Mariah's Executioner Sword. I'm going to put this one into the S, probably right at the top of the S tier. I want to put it in the broken because it does have one-shotting potential, but the thing is, you need to have the buffs to benefit. If you don't have things like the Godfrey's Icon, if you don't have the Thorny Cracks tier, it's not going to be that good, because the weapon skill does have like a longer animation to start up with. You don't really get much hype armor. You can get staggered out of it. And obviously that longer animation, because it has to constantly keep spinning over and over again. If you get staggered out of that portion, it's just not going to be doing good damage. But if you have all these buffs, it's just going to be shredding every single boss in the entire game very easily. It's very good. So yeah, solid S tier for that one. Jeez, all of these things are great. Bro, the Greatsword category is stacked. Holy shit. Ordovis' Greatsword. Also an S tier. I'm not going to put many things in the broken tier. Like the broken tier is going to be like the top 5, if you guys are wondering. Like broken is going to be like broken. Anyway. Ordovis' Greatsword is another solid S tier. This thing does stupid amounts of stance damage. When fully charged, the weapon skill does like over, I think it's like 62 stance damage. And it only consumes like 15 FP. It's like very similar to the Mariah's, but instead of like high amounts of damage, it does high amounts of stance. But actually still does really good stance damage as well. And you don't actually need to have a lot of the multi-hits talismans, you just need to have the Godfrey's icon, and then you could just benefit. Because yeah, it's really good. I think it gets just as much hype armor, if not more hype armor. Yeah, this thing can like script a lot of boss fights. It's just amazing. Despite its holy damage, it actually scales mainly off strength. So going all into strength means that it's going to do mainly physical damage, which is just better to have. So Ore Divers is an S tier. Alabaster's Lord Sword is another amazing weapon. I'm not sure if I put it into the S tier though. I might put it high A tier. Yeah. But this is like going to be another strength-based weapon. Strength intelligence kind of. It doesn't scale that well with intelligence. I think it's like a D-scaling. But the good things about this weapon is going to be its heavy attack and the weapon skill. The weapon skill, Alabaster's Lord's Pull, I think it's called, is just a better version of Gravitas. I don't really value Gravitas that much because it's kind of like more gimmicky because you either like push or pull enemies away, and it just has it like lacks a lot of damage. But it's pretty cheap. But the thing is with Alabaster's Lord's Pull, it has like twice as much range as Gravitas. Like it goes really far. And it does like pretty respectable damage. And I think for only like 15, 17 FP, I forget the actual FP cost, but it's pretty cheap. But another good thing about it is its heavy attack. It gets like, the motion values for the heavy attack is just as much as a Colossal Sword. So you can get like Colossal Sword heavy attack damage with just a Greatsword, which is kind of silly. It does get a pretty decent strength scaling, but it doesn't get a good dexterity scaling. And I think the weapon skill does scale off both, if I'm not mistaken. So that's probably the main reason why I'm not going to put it into the S tier. Death's Poker. Broken. Broken. This is also stupid damage. This thing does frost, and it procs frost faster than anything else. With that trail ash award that it gets, it's just ridiculous. It just does stupid damage and procs frost basically instantly. The other portion of the weapon skill that does that AoE explosion attack, pretty good for crowd control if you get surrounded by enemies because it can send them flying. So you just get a nice mix-up. But yeah, the total overall damage that this weapon skill gets is just dumb. It does get a D-scaling in intelligence, but it's kind of a deceptive D-scaling because it actually gets pretty decent returns. So going all into intelligence actually is very viable. It's actually pretty good. So yeah, broken. And then we have the Blasphemous Blade, which is also broken. Probably the best weapon in the entire game. Yeah, this thing... you get a very good strength and faith-based scaling, so you get very high amounts of AR. The weapon skill is just absolutely stupid. You get Taker's Flame, which just goes incredibly far, does stupid damage. You get a bunch of health regen for every single hit. It's probably just the most brain-dead weapon in the entire game. You can just spam this thing over and over. You put this in the hands of anybody and they'll succeed. Like, there are very few weapons in this game to where you can just put it into anybody's hands, just click this one button and they'll win. Like, that's basically it. That's why I consider it to be the best weapon, because like it's just so brain dead. And you get health regen on kills passively without even having to kill the weapon. Just have it equipped. Every kill, just health regen. What a funny weapon. Anyway, Golden Order Greatsword, probably the most disappointing weapon in the entire game, because this weapon should have been exactly like the Darkwind Greatsword, but just the holy damaging version. But it wasn't. Anyway. Where do I begin? Okay, so this thing gets very weird requirements as well as its scaling. So it gets like a 20-something dexterity requirement, but gets a D-scaling in dexterity. That's kind of odd. Does get holy damage, which, yes, holy damage, as we talked about today, not that good. Its weapon skill, Establish Order, is very high damaging, but the best part about the skill is going to be that projectile attack, and it takes like forever to get there, and you consume like 30 FP or 35 FP just to get to that projectile part. Whereas, you know, you look at something like the Darkwind Greatsword, you can just get that projectile part on like every single heavy attack. Should have been the exact same thing. But yeah, the first part of the skill is like a nice AoE, but I wish it was kind of like a stance to where like, you could choose to do the AoE or choose to do the projectile attack. If it just worked like a stance, I would like it so much more. Such a missed opportunity. Damn. So yeah, B tier is like the highest it can go for me. But yeah, anyway, Darkwind Greatsword is broken. Probably the second best weapon in the entire game. Okay, so this weapon gets passive Frost, which Frost is one of the best status effects, if not the best status effect. Just 10% flat damage, and just debuffs enemies to make them take 20% more damage for 20 seconds. And the Darkwind Greatsword probably does it just as well as anything else. Because the weapon skill buffs the weapon with even more magic damage and even more frost damage. Just going like all into intelligence makes this do like stupid amounts of AR. And it turns their heavy attacks into free projectiles. Which these projectiles do 35 or 30 stance damage, I believe it is. I believe it's 30 stance damage, which at a distance is kind of just stupid. And the fact that you're doing amazing frost build up, amazing damage, and not consuming any FP. There's like so many things that can help boost the heavy attack, like the jellyfish shield, all the magic buffs, Godfrey's icon. It's just, yeah, it's broken. It's broken. Sacred Relic Sword. Do I put this one into the broken tier? No. S tier. There is probably nothing in the game that's better at like clearing out entire rooms of enemies more so than the Sacred Relic Sword. If you think this is just a farming tool, you are sorely mistaken. This thing actually is really good damage, and it just like nothing can dodge it. Like it just clears out an entire room. I think the only downside is that it does consume, was it 40 FP or 42 FP? So every single time that you're going to build around the Sacred Relic Sword, I recommend going into the Carrion Filigree Crest. But actually it can do very nice damage. It can cheese a lot of bosses. It also does consume a lot of stamina as well, so I do recommend speccing into Endurance. Yes, it is going to be doing holy damage, which a lot of enemies are resist to. The weapon actually does get mainly physical damage though. So if you go up against those enemies that are resist to holy damage, just spamming the heavy attacks is going to be pretty viable because it's mainly physical. And if you get a poise break, getting the critical attack is really good because it gets 110 crit. And actually does get the most range out of all the great swords as well. So yeah, this is a very solid S tier. And the Helfen's Steeple. Oh boy. I'm sorry, chat, but this is the most overrated weapon in the entire game. I think people like it because of the way it looks, which it is one of the coolest looking weapons. I'll give you guys that, but like, no. Let's talk about it. There is quite literally no reason to use this over the Darkwind Greatsword in any circumstance, because Darkwind Greatsword gets more damage, you get it earlier in the game, gets more frost build up, and the buff actually turns its heavies into projectile attacks, whereas this thingy doesn't get frost build up until you use the weapon buff, which I'm pretty sure is like 80 frost build up and like 90 magic damage. Which the funny thing is, if you compare it to something like the Dragon Scale Blade or the Dragon Halberd, that weapon buff actually boosts with just as much frost, but just gives it more damage. So like that's just like an even better buff, and actually is a damaging Ash of War, whereas this one doesn't have a damaging Ash of War, it's just a buff. The only purpose that I see of the Helfen's Steeple is to power sense it with the Darkwind Greatsword. That's like its only use. But even then, I wouldn't really power sense it with a Darkwind Greatsword, because if I'm going to use a Darkwind Greatsword, I'm probably using it with a Jellyfish Shield. So I don't know why anyone would really use this outside of the fact that it looks cool. Or like you just don't want to have, I don't know, I guess. Yeah, B tier. The damage is pretty good, but it's still just not as good as the Darkwind Greatsword. If it's going to go based, like objectively speaking, like it's just directly outclassed. Anyway, Colossal Sword time. The Colossal Swords are a very solid weapon category. Get good variation of movesets, quick attacks. They get some pretty decent stance damage, although like not that much stance damage, especially when you compare to like hammers and great hammers. They get very nice range. They get amazing Ash of War options, and some of like the best Ashes of War in the game are just best paired alongside Colossal Swords. Things like maybe Lion's Claw, Giant Hunt, Vacuum Slice. These are just best paired with Colossal Swords. Anyway, Zweihander. I'm going to put it lower S tier. Yeah. Lower S tier for the Zweihander. So yeah, this bad boy actually is going to be like one of the lightest, if not the lightest Colossal Sword in the game. Does get like some of the lowest requirements. Is going to be dexterity based. But like the benefit of this weapon is that you get Colossal Sword damage with like such low weights, such low requirements. And you get a poking heavy attack. So, and obviously piercing damage is the best damage type. And counterattack damage is just stupid. And pairing this alongside the Spirit Talisman and charged heavy attack builds can be really dumb. Like this is basically going to be a nice alternative to like the Guts' Greatsword, because the Guts' Greatsword is like way heavier, way higher requirements. This thing, you can just get it right at the beginning of the game, slap it on, and you'll just benefit. It's just really good. And it gets like some of the most range as well. I think so. Probably like middle of the pack. Yeah, so S tier for that one. Guts' Greatsword. Broken. It gets the most range and it gets the most damage on a Colossal Sword. You go put on things like Lion's Claw and Giant Hunt onto this thing, and you can just spam L2 and everything will die. That is basically how this weapon works. The only downside I can say about it is that it is pretty heavy. And that's about it. I think it's like 23 units or some shit like that. It's not that big of a deal, but you get it right at the beginning of the game. It's just the most damage and the most range out of all the Colossal Swords. So putting it alongside certain skills, it's just going to make for the dumbest combo. I think one thing I also don't really care for is the heavy attack. It does like a horizontal swipe. I think I prefer the downward slam more. But then again, you could just use Lion's Claw if you want a downward slam. So yeah. Anyway, the Watchdog's Greatsword. The only reason to ever use the Watchdog's Greatsword is because you want to be like not like the other girls and you don't want to use the Guts' Greatsword. That's like their only purpose. Because it's just worse. It gets like way worse range. The damage is actually somewhat similar. I think with maybe certain like strength type in builds, maybe at higher strength it kind of becomes the same, but it's just worse range. So like, and like the same moveset, I think it does get the downward slam for a heavy attack, but as I mentioned, if you want a downward slam, Lion's Claw, if it's that important to you. So yeah, I think it's just, yeah, it's just worse. The Troll's Golden Sword is like this, the worst version of that. And I'm pretty sure the exact same moveset. I don't know why this even exists. So yeah, it's just average damage, average range. I think it's actually some of the worst range. I think it's even worse than the Watchdog Sword. So that could be a C tier. And then we have the Troll's Knight Sword, which is going to be a fat D tier. This thingy is even worse than that. It's a magic weapon with a D-scaling and intelligence. But it doesn't even get a unique skill. It gets Troll's Roar, which is just stupid. Why didn't it get Glenn's Blade Phalanx as a weapon skill, like what the actual Trolls Knights use? But it gets Troll's Roar instead. It does get the Zweihander heavy attack poke, but if you want to just use the Zweihander, then the Zweihander is just going to have more range and just do more damage, even if you put it with a magic-based infusion. So like, yeah, I don't really know what they were thinking with this. Probably the worst Colossal Sword in the game. The Royal Greatsword. This one actually can get really high amounts of damage. It's going to be one of the few like strength and intelligence weapons in the game. Like one's like the actual like split even strength and intelligence. Most weapons actually get like, they always scale better with one, either strength or intelligence, not really both. This one actually scales well with both. So it gets really high amounts of AR. I have many problems with it though. Not problems, but like some things that I wish it was better in. One, it doesn't get frost unless you're using the skill. And it only gets frost on like the AoE explosion attack, and it's not really that much frost. So like it's really many cases where you actually do proc frost with this weapon. Two, the skill itself does get nice hyper armor, but the thing is the damage is split up in two parts, like the initial slam attack and the AoE attack, and it gets split even like 50-50 damage. And the chances of actually missing with the first downward slam is actually pretty high. So if you miss with that downward slam, you're just missing out on like 50% of the weapon skill damage. And you actually can get staggered out when you land on the ground. You get nice hyper armor in the air, but as soon as you land on the ground, you don't get nice hyper armor. So you can get staggered out of that and just do like no damage. So one thing I wish is that the first initial downward slam of the Ash War actually did an AoE. And it actually had passive frost on the weapon itself. But it still gets nice hyper armor. It's still fun to use. It's still high damaging. So I think A tier is still valid. Lower A tier. Why do I have some of these? I've got to rearrange this. Okay. Okay, chat. What I'm saying is important, not how I rank them. Okay. We're going to go rearrange this at the end. This seems like a mess. Grafted Blade Greatsword. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called, right? Grafted Sword. I forget. It's Grafted Greatsword or Grafted Blade Greatsword. I forget. Anyway, this thing does get some pretty nice amounts of base damage. It is pretty heavy, and it does have like a higher requirement. I think it's like 40 strength. And the total overall damage is not that great because you can't buff nor infuse it. The only benefit of it is going to be its skill. I think it's called like Oath of Devotion or some shit. But it basically just buffs to give you like +5 to all of your stats for like 60 seconds and give you like Perseverance or Endure. Which is pretty cool. I guess you only really use this for its buff. You just keep switching back and forth to maybe like meet the minimum requirements or something, or just get a bit of boost to your damage and health and stamina. So I guess if you're just going to use it for a buff, it's going to get in the B. Like if this was like on a weapon that was like had a lot less requirements, it'd be more useful. But you need like at least like 27 strength to use the buff, and constantly switching back and forth could be a bit of an issue. But it's still pretty useful though, because it is going to be like a portable like Godric's Great Rune kind of thing. Rowan's Greatsword. There's basically no reason to use the Ruins Greatsword over the Blasphemous Blade, but like not many things there really is a reason to. But it gets like a very similar skill. Goes like just as far as the Blasphemous Blade. It can also have that same like knocking back effect, but the Blasphemous Blade can just do more damage because there's more things that actually help boost the damage of it, and it just gets health regen. So like Ruins Greatsword doesn't really have much else going for it. One thing that I wish that Ruins Greatsword had was just more stance damage, because it gets the same stance damage. I don't know why. This thing should actually have like closer to 30 stance damage. It gets like 23, whereas the Blasphemous Blade also gets 23 stance damage with Taker's Flame. So I'm probably just going to put it into the A tier. It also gets really high requirements, and it weighs a lot. It's like 50 strength requirements. Doesn't really get that much range. Like if the Blasphemous Blade didn't exist, I'd put it into the S tier, but like it's just that the Blasphemous Blade does. So it does the exact same thing but better. So I'll lower A tier, but like it's still broken though. Like it's not broken, but still like does dumb shit. Stupid damage. Anyway, Star Scourge Greatsword. I might also put this one into the A tier, maybe the S tier. Yeah, fuck, I put it into S tier. The benefit of the Star Scourge Greatsword is that it's a weapon that can be power stance when two-handed. So you just have to level up one weapon to gain a power stancing combo, which is obviously good. It doesn't actually weigh that much despite being two weapons. So you don't have to spec into a lot of endurance just to bear the weight of two weapons. That's another benefit. And its weapon skill, Starcrawler Cry, is very high damaging. The initial AoE attack, the first AoE doesn't do that much damage, but the follow-up attack is what does most of the damage. You get nice amount of hyper armor. My only problem is that it does consume a decent amount of FP. I think it's like 20 FP for both parts. The camera died. That's fine. We don't need the camera anyway. It's lagging. Can't even turn it off now. Let's just hide the camera. We don't need the camera. We're good. Anyway. What was I saying? The Star Scourge Greatsword, yeah. Does nice amounts of damage. The only downside is that it does have pretty poor range. And you don't get the cool like crouching attacks. The crouching or rolling attacks like you do with the other Colossal Swords. How it does a cool poking attack. It just gets like the downward slam. So yeah, that's the downside of the Star Scourge Greatsword. But it still is very high damaging. And you can power stance it just by two-handing, which is pretty cool. The Godslayer's Greatsword. Okay. So Godslayer's Greatsword also gets really high amounts of damage. The weapon skill can just like shred a whole bunch of enemies. For like 30 FP, which is pretty good. But the thing is, it doesn't get hyper armor. Like it's like a longer animation and it's a short range skill. And you don't get hyper armor. It used to have hyper armor and then they got rid of it. I'm not sure if that was a bug or not. But you don't get any, you're going to get staggered out of it like straight away. You need to have like a lot of poise, which is super annoying. The weapon skill, the light attack combos is unique in that it gets a bunch of these diagonal swipes. But the thing is that the diagonal swipes are actually like slower than like the regular sideward swipes. They actually can combo nicely. So maybe like the follow-up attacks can be a bit faster if you go from like the heavy attacks or the rolling attacks into the light attack combo. Can be pretty cool. But yeah, it's still bugged. So if they fix it, it'd go back to the S tier. Because it used to have hyper armor. I know my camera died. I turned it off. I could probably fix that up after this. So it's going to go to the A tier and still gets fixed again, which, I don't know. They haven't fixed it. Malika's Blackblade. Okay, another high damaging weapon. This is going to be like one of the better ones to have like in New Game Plus, because enemies will just have a lot of health. And even if you have bad damage, you can just go slap on a destined death weapon like the Malika's Blackblade and just shred enemies. It gets a really good strength and faith-based scaling. I think it's like a B scaling in both, so it gets high amounts of AR. It is going to be holy damage, so that high amounts of AR is just going to get counteracted. But the weapon skill does just shred everything. But the problem is with the weapon skill is that it does consume 40 FP, which is very high. 40 FP is a lot, and it is going to be a longer animation, so you're probably going to trade out a lot of times, but you're going to be like winning that trade because it does stupid damage. So I think A tier is respectable. I'll reorganize this shit later. Okay, so I fix up this stupid camera so you guys stop fucking talking about it. think everything's broken. It's not letting me like open the OBS. Why? I think the camera is going to be done. Wait, no. Are we saved? I think we're saved. For some reason, my OBS is like tanking super hard. I'm still live, right? Yeah. Cool. Okay, we're back. Anyway. What am I doing? Anyway, that's the Colossal Swords done. Let's go move on to the Thrusting Swords. Okay, so the Thrusting Swords... I like them. They're really quick. Piercing damage is obviously going to be really good. Their stance damage is like some of the lowest. And in terms of like quicker types of weapons, they're always this best power stance. So things like curved swords, straight swords, when you have them power stance, it's really good. But thrusting swords, I don't really like the power stance combos because they do it like not simultaneously. They swing like one at a time, which is going to be like a longer animation. So if you're going to be using these types of weapons, spears, straight swords, curved swords are just going to do it better. But if you're two-handing a thrusting sword, it's going to be very quick and do high amounts of DPS in some cases. Anyway, starting off with the regular rapier. This one is just going to get some of the worst damage in the class, but it does get 130 crit, which is very nice. I'm not sure what you're going to be using to try and like proc a stance break with this weapon. Maybe like glint blade phalanx. I'm not too sure. If you're going to use that as an offhand option, you're better off just going with like a misericord, which that's going to be better. So I might just put this one into like the B tier because I'm not really sure how you would build around the regular rapier because it does also get like some of the worst range and it gets like the regular poking heavy attack as well. So you just get nothing but poke, so you don't really get much variation. So I'd probably just put it into the C tier. Yeah, DS2 rapier is broken. Yeah, it's not going to be like the Dark Souls 2 rapier. That was a stupid DPS. Anyway, the S stock is the best stock. And the Noble's S stock is like the exact same thing. I like these ones the best out of all the rapiers because they actually get a horizontal swipe for a heavy attack, which that is just always going to be good. When you get these types of weapons, just having variation is just amazing in PvE because if you go up against those enemies with like really weird hitboxes, they're like super skinny, they're hard to hit with poking attacks, having a horizontal swipe is always going to be good. And if you want to hit multiple enemies too. So that's going to be nice. You could just always use something like spinning slash on like the thrusting swords if you were liking that, but just being able to do it without consuming FP is pretty nice. So I think S tier. I think the S stock is just better than the Noble's S stock. I think they're like identical. I think this one, I think it just gets more range and more damage. I think so. Maybe the Noble's gets a bit more range. I forget it, but I think the S stock is just better. So I might put this one into like a lower A tier. Anyway, the Clean Rod Sword is going to be your highest damaging one. But as I mentioned before, I just rather have the S stock for the variation and moveset. Unless you're going to go with a weapon skill that just already gets good horizontal swipes maybe, then this one's probably just going to be your best option. But yeah, in a PvE setting, I'd rather just have the regular S stock, but it's still going to be like amazing damage though. Regier's Rapier. This one actually gets the worst base damage, I believe, compared to all the rapiers, but the trade-off being is that it does get a double poke with its heavy attack, which could be good at proccing status effects. It means that it's going to do more damage than like a regular heavy attack, although with like a slightly longer animation, but it is still pretty quick. But like, yeah, I'd rather not have a trade-off in damage, so B tier. B tier. Ansper Rapier. Yeah, I'm going to turn this into a video. I'll post it on YouTube. I'm not going to like edit it though. I'm just going to throw it out there. Anyway, Ansper Rapier is basically identical to like the regular rapier. I think it gets like just a bit more damage, but it just gets Scarlet Rot. Still can be infused. Same moveset and everything. Which, yes, I don't like the rapier range nor the moveset because there's no variation. But the fact that it gets Scarlet Rot is always going to be good. And the fact that you can infuse it is just another bonus. I wish that Scarlet Rot actually did scale of Arcane, so I could just go spec into Arcane to further improve the Scarlet Rot build up, because typically if you're going to go with status effect builds and going into Arcane, it's going to make proc things like poison and bleed like straight away, where it's going to take a while to still proc with the Ansper Rapier. Unless you're like power stancing with like Rot Grease, then it's going to proc it pretty quickly. And if you do want to go with a Scarlet Rot build, as I mentioned before, just going into Using the spells is going to be better. It's like if you're going to go with an arcane build, using something like Rotten Breath is going to be better because you do 30% damage instead of 15% damage. But it's still Scarlet Rod. Still 15%, still pretty good. So, the Frozen Needle. The funny thing is, there's not a single thrusting sword that gets a unique Ash of War. It's kind of sad. This is the only one that can be infused. Or this is the only one that actually is upgraded with Somber Weapons and cannot be infused. And I guess Impaling Thrust. Does get a unique heavy attack though, with like a cool projectile that can proc Frost. You can actually use the Feint attack to also do a projectile. This is going to be a B tier though, because it's still like pretty poor range. The heavy attack doesn't even work with the Axe Talisman and the Spiked Cracked tier. I don't know why. It's pretty sad. If it did, I'd like it a lot more. But like the damage is like super mid. But it still is like a free projectile attack, so I think B tier is pretty comfortable for it. I'm not sure if that's a bug or not. But yeah, it doesn't work with any buffs, the heavy attack. I don't think it even works with the Spear Talisman. I think it does like standard damage as well. Kind of weird. Anyway. Heavy Thrusting Sword. This weapon category is kind of stacked as well. Not many, but like all four of them are really good. Heavy Thrusting Swords are probably going to have like the best two-handed moveset in the entire game. Those light attacks actually come out pretty quick, but they just have amazing range, do some very respectable stance damage, and their running heavy attacks are just stupid. They just cover so much distance so quickly, and obviously they're doing piercing damage as well. Like I could put all these things into the S tier. The Great Epee, I value it a lot because its heavy attack is a horizontal swipe. It's going to be like the S stock, but just the heavy thrusting version, which I value a lot. It's really cool. It doesn't get as much damage as like the Godskin Stitcher, but I probably prefer it more because it has that nice variation. But the Godskin Stitcher still gets a unique heavy attack in that it does a double poke, which is going to be good for damage, and probably proccing status effects. So they're just all going to be like really good weapons. The Bloody Hellas is also going to be another S tier. Like this one just is going to be an arcane based one. Obviously gets bleed. Its weapon skill is really good. Dynast's Finesse does actually have an inherent iframe dodge as the first part of the skill. And that dodge actually does get like way more iframes than like a regular dodge. So it's actually easy to use. Does get more recovery frames though. So spamming it isn't going to be as useful as a spamming dodge. But it doesn't consume much FP. I think it's like 5 FP. The follow-up attack has a nice lunge, does really good damage for only like 7 FP. It's just really solid. Like, it's just an amazing weapon overall. Good S tier. Dragon King's Cragblade. Okay. This one might not get to the S tier. It might not. I might put it high A tier, because like, it still does everything else that like the regular heavy thrusting swords do in terms of its moveset. I think it gets like the regular heavy attack though. It doesn't get like the cool double swipe or the horizontal swipe. So the heavy attack I'm not going to like as much. It does have a higher dexterity requirement. I think it's like 35 dexterity requirement. But the weapon skill can be high damaging. It can actually do really high stance damage. It is infinite hyper armor, so you're never going to get staggered out of it. I think like if you hit with the entire combo, like the whole cloud and everything, it's like upwards of a 60 stance damage, which is actually really good. Now my problems with it is that in that cloud animation, when you have it fully charged, it doesn't work with the multi-hit talismans, and it doesn't work with the Godfrey's icon. So it doesn't work with either of those two things. So you're missing out on a whole bunch more damage. The hit detection can be kind of weird. Against those smaller enemies, it can just go like bypass them and just miss. And it does have longer recovery frames. So when you land on the ground, it does have like a longer animation, and you can get hit a whole bunch after you use it. You kind of like just roll out of it straight away. So there's some problems with it, but when it works really well. But there's a few things that I probably would change about it to make it a bit better. But yeah, either way, it's still really good. Still really good. 37 dexterity, thank you. Yes, the curved swords are going to be one of the best weapon classes as well. They probably gets the best power stance combo in the entire game, because everything from their light attacks to their running attacks to their jumping attacks just hit so many times so quickly. They can proc all these buffs incredibly fast and just do stupid amounts of damage. Only thing they typically lack would be like variation in movesets. They don't really get things like poking attacks, but like, with their like jumping and running attacks, they get power stance. It doesn't really matter. They just do so much stance damage, so much DPS. It's just ridiculous. But starting off with the regular scimitar, it does get a unique light attack combo compared to all of the other curved swords. But the thing is, it's not even like faster. It's like the exact same speed. I think maybe like the second or third swing is like a frame or two quicker when I looked at the frame data. It does actually lunge further, which I guess is cool. But you are going to take like a big hit to like damage in general. And the Shamshir just does the exact same thing but better when compared to the regular scimitar. So I just like throw that one into like the B tier because it's still a curved sword. The Falchion is just going to be like your heavy based or your strength based curved sword, but it is going to be outclassed by like the Beastman's in terms of damage. So that can also just go into the B tier. But still is a curved sword, so also good. The Shamshir is just going to be a better version of the scimitar. As I mentioned, does get that cool, unique light attack combo. But the thing is, when you're using curved sword, you just want to power sense anyway. So like, even if this curved sword light attack combo was like a bit better, power sensing is still going to be the best bet. And just going with a power sensing tool, going to the best power sensing tool is going to be the best option, of which the Shamshir doesn't get a unique power sensing moveset or anything. So I think B tier is still fine for this. The Grossmesser is going to be this like your best like quality based option. So if you're going to go with a quality build at like really high levels, I think the Grossmesser can actually out damage all of the other ones, even potentially the Bandit's curved sword. But that's like very, very niche still. So that's another B tier. Anyway, the Bandit's curved sword is broken. Bandits is broken. Like almost all these curved swords are just going to be outclassed by the Bandits because the Bandits just gets like the most range and the most damage. Like with almost every infusion, the Bandits just outclasses it. Ridiculous amounts of damage. And if you're going to power stance, just getting a couple of Bandits is just going to be better than like everything else. So despite all these curved swords still being like really good because they're still curved swords, Bandits just does it better. Nothing is really as broken as like power sense Bandits curved swords. The shuttle though is a complete garbage. This garbage. Terrible. I don't know why they decided to make the shuttles this bad in this game, but these things have the worst range, the worst damage, for like no reason. Like the only benefit they have is that they can hit around shields, kind of like a scythe, because it does have like this weird shape. But they thought that was so broken that they had to make the range and the damage like so much worse. There's not many shielded enemies in this game, so I don't know why they decided to have such a like a stupid downside for this. Scavengers, I'll probably put this one to the S tier. Obviously, Bleed Scavengers is really good, but like it's specifically for a Bleed-based build. So when you go to higher levels of Arcane, it's going to be really good. Whereas Bandits, I'm probably going to find it more useful because it's good for like, it's the best one to use for all builds. But if you're going to go Bleed, then Scavengers is going to be the best one. So do I put it into the broken tier? I mean, yeah, Power Stance Bandits is broken, yeah. I mean, as is like Power Stance Scavenger. Yeah, I don't know. That's fine. That's fine. Please notice me. I noticed you. There you go. You're welcome. The Mantis Blade. Trash. I fucking hate this thing. I really hate this thing. I mean, it gets like average damage for a curved sword. But it gets like the worst range out of all the curved swords. And for some reason, it doesn't get bleed, unlike the enemies that actually use it. And it does get a unique heavy attack in that it doubles the range, but like double of like not much is still not going to be much. And I think it's like a longer animation than like a regular heavy attack. Actually, no, it gets like a maybe it's quicker animation. Might be a quicker animation, so maybe a D tier. Maybe a D tier. I just wish that like it had like a unique skill, kind of like the Mantis Blade, or like maybe when you two-hand it, it does a power stance combo. And does like the cool flowering attack that does bleed. I don't know why they just didn't make it work like the Cemetery Shades and how they use it. It's kind of stupid. I don't know what chat's on about. I've been ignoring them the entire time. They're saying stupid stuff. Anyway, Beastman's Curved Sword. This is going to be your best strength-based curved sword. I'm pretty sure in terms of damage. Actually does get a unique jumping attack with a cool like double swipe. So it might be pretty cool in terms of like damage and maybe proccing status effects. So it's pretty cool. I'm probably not going to be able to use it over like the Bandit's curved sword because the Bandit still just gets more damage. And when you're going with curved swords, the best way to build around them is power stanced, of which the Bandits and the Scavengers just do it better than everything else. But if you get a two-handed weapon, this one might be one of the better ones. If you get a two-handed curve sword, that is. Because obviously, it's a strength-based weapon. You're going to be doing more damage. And it gets the cool jumping heavy attack. So, that's nice. The flowing... Is it just the flowing curve sword? That's the Nox flowing sword. That's the flowing curve sword, right? Yeah. Flowing curve sword is probably just going to go into the B tier as well. It's just going to be like average damage, average range. The only thing that's unique about it is its heavy attack, which it is going to be like a longer animation, but like regular curve sword heavy attacks typically are a longer animation anyway. And I think uncharged heavy attack of this thing, I like it better than the uncharged heavy attack of a regular curve sword. So like that's the only thing that I like about it more. Anyway. What am I doing? Serpent God Curve Sword. Okay, this is another strength-based curve sword. Not going to get as much damage as the Beastman's. So it's just inherently just going to be worse, I believe. But the benefit of this is that it does give you HP regen for every single kill. I think it's like 75 HP or something like that for every single time that you get a kill, which is pretty cool. C tier. I don't really care. I mean, you can just put it in the offhands, and it is pretty light. It is pretty light. You can probably pair it alongside the Blasphemous Blade and just throw it in your offhand, and just two hands the Blasphemous Blade, and you could just get even more HP regen. You're pretty funny. I guess B tier is fine. The Magma Blade. I want to put it into the S tier, but I might put it high A tier. Like, yes, you have to farm for it. The farm is like terrible and cringe. We get that. But the damage is really good. You get a good strength and faith-based scaling. And the weapon skill is just a reskinned version of Spinning Slash. And maybe like Flame Art infused bandits might get more damage with Spinning Slash, but the lava does take it over the top because the lava can actually hit a lot of times. The one downside that I have with this thing is that compared to Spinning Slash, it gets less stance damage. I don't know why. I don't know why it gets less stance damage. I think it gets like, because I think regular Spinning Slash with a curve sword gets like about 27 or something like that. This gets like 22 from memory, which is kind of annoying. I put it into the S tier. Why not? It still like melts everything. It melts everything really quickly. I wish it had more stance damage though. The Noxus Flowing Sword actually isn't even that bad. It's actually one of the more FP efficient skills in the game. I think it's like literally like 9 FP. Someone confirm for me. Is this like 9 FP or 12 FP? It's either one of those two. And the skill actually does go pretty far. It does like it's either 15 or like 20 stance damage. It can actually like cheat a lot of enemies. This actually did fuck up Millennia pretty easily because you could stay at that safer distance and just keep spamming the skill and she like doesn't do anything about it. She doesn't like input read or dodge it at all, and you could use it as a nice projectile attack, and it's very cheap. The only downside is that the weapon does not get good damage. If I were to fix it, I would just let it be buffed. If you could buff this weapon, I'd like it a lot more because it's still pure physical damage. It just gets a strength and dexterity scaling. So like if it could be buffed, I'd like it more, but I still think it's pretty solid. I don't know, maybe high B tier. I don't think I want to put it into the A tier. The damage isn't that good. Anyway, Ring of Astel broken. This thing is stupid. This weapon right here gets the best stance potential in the entire game. Yeah, I don't know why a curve sword is the best stance breaking weapon, but it just ended up being that way. But yeah, the reason why it's broken is because the weapon skill does like upwards of like 60 stance damage and it only consumes like 20 FP. And you can keep spamming it over and over again. It does it in a nice horizontal spread and a nice projectile attack. And not only does the weapon skill do good stance damage, but the heavy attack does good stance damage too. Like the heavy attack fully charged at point blank range does 52 stance damage, which is just as much as a charged heavy attack of like a colossal weapon. So like something like, I'm not sure if, I think it does less than that. Maybe like something like the Golem's Halberd charged heavy attack, it does like just as much as that. And it's a curved sword. Because it is a projectile and it's hitting with both the projectile and the weapon at the same time, and it's just making it do more stance damage. Obviously, when you're using it at a distance, the heavy attack isn't going to be doing as much stance damage, but it's a free projectile attack that does good damage. And it does stack with things like the Spiked Cracks tier and the Axe Talisman But yeah, this thing, and it gets really good scaling. It's like a really good dexterity and intelligence scaling. This thing is just flawless. Absolutely flawless. And the opposite of that is the Eclipse Shuttle. Complete trash. This thing is so egregiously bad. It's basically like the regular shuttle, so therefore it has to have terrible range and have terrible damage, but the broken benefit and upside is that it can do more damage around shields. Wow, really cool. Yeah, it does do split holy damage, which is obviously really bad. And its weapon skill is just going to add a bit more holy damage and more death blight, and death blight is just useless in this game, even in PvP. It's just fucking useless. I don't know why death blight didn't get reworked. It's kind of hard to like balance a mechanic where it just instantly kills things. Like, how do you make that balanced? Like a status effect that just kills stuff. They should have made it like a debuff and make it work in PvE. I probably would have had more value to this weapon. And the weapon skill does get a follow-up attack to where it's like a combustion type of thing or like a catch flame, O-flame type of thing, but just holy damage instead. But it takes way too long to get to that animation, and it consumes a decent amount of FP. You don't get hyper armor, and it doesn't even do good damage. So yeah, this thing is bad. Anyway, I need a drink. I'm dying and suffering here. Yapping too much. We're good. I'm surviving. Anyway, the curved greatswords are an amazing weapon class, especially since like one of the recent updates and buffs, because like these heavy attacks and running attacks come out like super duper fast now. They do really decent stance damage. I think they do like almost just as much stance damage. I think they do just as much as a regular greatsword. But they typically have like faster like movesets. They do slashing damage as well, which a lot of enemies are weak to slashing damage. A lot of enemies are resist to. Kind of balances out. They get some pretty decent Ash of War options. Putting things like Spinning Slash or Stormblade on this thing is going to make it really good. Now the Dismounter I probably value the most out of all the ones that can be infused, because it does get some of the most range. And it's just a regular curved greatsword moveset. Doesn't get as much damage as things like the Beastman's or the Omen Cleaver. But I'm going to put it into the S tier, because I just value this one the most. It just gets the good heavy attack, good light attack combos, decent damage. It's just great. It's a very solid curved greatsword, and it probably does it the best. The Omen Cleaver does do more damage, but the thing is, the heavy attack is a very short range downward chop, and it does have a slightly faster animation. But ever since the one of the recent updates that actually buffed the heavy attack speed overall, the heavy attacks of the Dismounter are kind of like just as fast as the Omen Cleaver now, and it just has more range and does just as much stance damage. So yeah, the Omen Cleaver, I'm not going to value it as much. It still is really good because it does more damage, obviously. I think the only downside with all of these curved greatswords is that they have to farm for them. Like every single curved greatsword you have to farm for, like, which is like super annoying. You can't really like just buy any of these things. But yeah, they're all really good though. Except for the Monk's Flame Blade. This one is super annoying because like it just performs worse than like all the other curved greatswords in terms of damage and range, and it doesn't get anything unique. Because I don't know why it doesn't get bleed. Like, look, it looks like it's supposed to get bleed, and you can't get bleed. But this is probably like the rarest weapon in the entire game, because it's off like one enemy at like the end of the game in some stupid dungeon that's like halfway through a dungeon, and it has like a 1% drop rate, and it's like super shit. I probably put it into the D tier for that reason. I think it is one of the lightest curved greatswords. Like, that's the only thing that it has going for it. Outside of that, it's just trash. Just use the Dismounter, it's better. Why not Black Flame? Yeah, something unique. Something. Anyway, the Beastman's Curved Sword. Curved Greatsword. Beastman's... What's it called again? I don't know. The Curved Greatsword version of the Beastman's Sword. Oh, Cleaver. Beastman's Cleaver, I think it's called. This one does get the highest amount of damage out of all the other Curved Greatswords that can be infused. The downside is that it has some of the worst range, and it weighs a lot. I think it's like 16 or 17 units, which is like a lot heavier than all the other curved greatswords, and it's like a lot less range. So like honestly, I'd rather have like a sacrifice of like 10 to like 20 AR, and then just have the Dismounter instead, or the Beast, or the Omen Cleaver, because it just gets like way more range and it weighs a lot less. So yeah, I don't like the range, so I'm just gonna put it into the B tier. The range is not that good. It's kind of like the broadsword, but like for the curved greatswords instead. Might go high B tier though. Anyway, the Bloodhound Fang is broken. They put this weapon right at the beginning of the game just for the casuals that were going to have a problem with playing. Because one, it's a Sombra-based weapon really early on. It gets some of the most range in class. It gets some of the most damage. It gets a high damaging weapon skill that's very easy to use. That gets an iframe dodge. That's incredibly cheap. I think it's like 20 FP, less than 20 FP for the entire combo. I think it's like 18. And it gets bleed. And it can get buffed. And it gets bonus motion values on jumping attacks. It gets everything. It gets everything. But yeah, you can buff this thing with Blood Flame Blade and then spam the skill, spam everything, and you're just going to win. It's just that good. There's nothing bad about this weapon at all. And it's a curved greatsword with a good curved greatsword moveset, the exact same moveset as the dismounter. It's just amazing. Only downside I can say about it is that it doesn't get a faith or intelligence scaling, and spells are really powerful in this game, so you're not going to have good synergy with spells because it's just going to be strength and dexterity based, but it doesn't matter. It does not matter. Anyway, the Onyx's Lord's Greatsword. Right? Is that what it's called? Yeah. Onyx Lord's Greatsword. This is going to be a C tier. It does get really good scalings. It gets like a B scaling in both intelligence and strength. But its weapon skill is literally just Gravitas. It does do a bit more damage than Gravitas, but it has like twice as long as an animation and does like twice as much, costs like twice as much FP. I think it's like 30 FP or 28 FP. And it just does like a little bit more damage than Gravitas. And like a longer animation, which is like super annoying. Because Gravitas isn't even that good to begin with. Because it's just more like gimmicky. Because you can like suck and pull enemies in. But like the range isn't that good. Repulsion, yeah, I think it pulls them away. Instead of sucks them in. So yeah. Who cares? I'd rather have like good damage than be able to push enemies or suck them in. Like, I don't really know. I mean, I guess it's cool and useful. But like the FP cost and the speed is not that good. If you want to use something similar to this, just use the Alabaster's Lord Sword. This one just performs way better. The skill goes like twice as far, consumes half the amount of FP, and does like almost just as much damage. It's just a much better weapon. Or just use like a curved greatsword with an actual good weapon skill. The Zamora Curved Sword. This is a very funny weapon because it has an S tier weapon skill, but the weapon itself is like a D tier. It's really funny. There's like no other weapon that kind of works like this. But yeah, the reason why the weapon itself kind of sucks is that it is just a faith or a strength and dexterity based weapon. So it's not going to have any synergy with anything else. Its light attack combos are beyond horrendous. These things are super slow, get really bad hit detection, get stuck in these stupid animations. They don't lunge very far at all. The Zamora Curved Sword gets the worst range, like terrible range. Like even curved swords can get more range than this thing. But its weapon skill, Zamora Ice Storm, is an absolute machine. Like, it does such a decent magic projectile Ash of War that procs Frost basically instantly and does like almost 40 stance damage. It's just dumb. So I'm gonna like put it into the A tier because like it's an S tier skill. And like in this game, skill spam is going to be like the meta. So like you can just spam the skill the entire time. Honestly, it does get the same heavy attacks as all the other weapons, so you don't have to use a light attack. You can just keep spamming the heavy attack, like uncharged heavies, and it could just work. Or just spam the skill. And I think it's only like 15 FP as well. I'm not going to talk about DLC weapons. We'll talk about those next week, or 2 weeks from now, whenever it comes out. Yeah. The Magma Worm Scale Sword. This is going to be another S tier. This weapon... Pretty sure it gets the highest amount of AR out of all the curved greatswords. It gets like a really good faith and strength based scaling, and its weapon skill Magma Guillotine just stupid damage, dumb damage. This is really the high S tier, dumb damage. You become airborne, you get like infinite hyper armor, you come crashing to the ground. Really high damaging attack. The follow up attack for only like an additional 10 FP does like even more, and like the entire combo can just melt everything, and it leaves lava on the ground for even more damage. It's just really good, and it does like decent stance damage too. The only downside is that it does get to the Omen Cleaver heavy attack, which I don't like because it's like a short range chop, and it's the same thing with like the jumping attack too. It's the only thing that I don't like about it. But yeah, other than that, it's just an amazing weapon. The Morgoth's Cursed Sword is going to be another S tier. Maybe not as high as the Magma Worms. I'll probably put it like lower S tier. I'll rearrange this later. But yes, the Morgoth's Cursed Sword is going to be the longest curved greatsword in the game and the lightest curved greatsword. I think it's like only like 7.5 units, which like that's the same weight as like some other curved swords in this game maybe. And it gets bleed, which obviously that's going to be an amazing combo. Does get a pretty decent dexterity and arcane. I think the arcane scaling is at D, which at least it does get an arcane scaling because there is a way to improve the blood loss build up. And the weapon skill Morgoth's or Cursed Blood Slice. The stream died. Did it actually? Just a refresh. It died on... It froze for a second. Don't know why that happened. Are we good now? What was the last thing I was talking about? I'm missing like a lot of follows and stuff and like a lot of subs. I'll talk about those things later. Anyway, Morgoth's Cursed Sword. You yap too much? I know I do. I'm sorry. Yeah, 7.5 units, yeah. Yes, the weapon skill Morgoth's Cursed Blood Slice is very high damaging, really good lunge. It covers distance pretty nicely. It does consume like 20 FP for both parts of the skill. So like the entire FP combo is 40 FP, which can be on the higher end, but like it does like amazing damage. But like that's like the only downside I can say is that it's descaling in arcane and like high FP cost. That's like it. But everything else about it is like very good. Very worthy of an S tier. Anyway, time to talk about the katanas. Probably the most popular weapon category, and I can guarantee when I make this into a YouTube video, the most replayed is probably going to be the katanas. But yeah, the katanas are going to be a really good weapon class like they are in every single game. Really quick attacks, solid range. They all get a passive status effect, mostly being bleed. They get good Ash of War options like Unsheath, which is unique to the katanas. That just does amazing damage really quickly for not much FP. The power stance combos are also pretty good. I don't really care much for the light attack power stance combos, but the jumping attacks and the rolling attacks are very solid. Overall, just amazing weapons, and all their options are pretty good too. Starting off with the Uchigatana. I probably throw this one into the A tier. There's not really many circumstances of which I would use this over the Nagakiba, because the Nagakiba gets like almost just as much damage, but just way more range and the better moveset in my opinion with the heavy attacks. The Uchigatana is still going to be really good because it does get more damage than the Nagakiba in some cases. Actually, in most cases. I think there might be a specific circumstance with like a quality build or maybe like a higher dexterity level build that the Nagakiba might perform better. So I'll probably still put this on like high A tier. But yeah, the Nagakiba is going to be an S tier. Broken? I'll put a high S tier maybe. I don't know if I put it broken. If I put the Bandit's Curved Sword in broken, maybe I put the Nagakiba in broken too. Thing is, if you put the Nagakiba with something like Bloodblade, it can just like destroy everything. A Bloodblade Nagakiba is going to be like what everyone thinks the Reduvia is like, but just better. Broadsword is not a bad take in the B tier. I talked about it. You can go scroll back and you can listen to what I said about the Broadsword. Yeah, the Nagakiba just gets absolutely stupid range. And it gets those heavy attack pokes, which poking attacks are obviously going to be really good. The fact that you can get poking attacks with like a standstill katana is just kind of this ridiculous, but yeah. It's like so much more range than all the other katanas, it's not even funny. And it doesn't even get that much less damage than all the other katanas. And with certain weapon skill combos like Unsheath or like Bloodblade, it could just cheese the entire game like really quickly. It's like, it's that good. The Serpent's Bone Blade could be an S tier weapon if you could just infuse it. But unfortunately, you cannot infuse it, so it's just a B tier. It literally would be an S if you could infuse it. It should be infused. They were going to let it be infused, and they probably changed it last second because it requires smithing stones, and it can't be infused, which is really weird. But it should have just been like the Venomous Fang, but there's the Katana version. But yeah, it gets Deadly Poison, which Deadly Poison is going to be like a better version of Poison because it just takes for like twice as much. But if it could be infused, you could just go spec into Arcane and you could proc Poison really quickly, and you can just keep procking it over and over again because it only lasts 30 seconds. But yeah, the annoying thing about it as well is that it gets double slash at this weapon skill, which double slash is fine, but it's not unique. And its heavy attack is also a double swipe. So it's like the exact same thing, but it's arguably even better because the heavy attack can do more damage with like things like the spiked cracks tier and the axe talisman, and just do more stance damage too. So it's like, it's very unfortunate. Would have been cool if it also kept bleed as well, but what can you do? The Meteoric Ore Blade is a C tier. This is going to be the worst katana in the game because, one, it's going to be a magic-based katana, so therefore it has to compete with the Moon Veil, and it's not going to be as good. It is going to be like a strength-based version compared to like the dexterity version that the Moon Veil is. The weapon skill is Gravitas, which is 1, not that good, 2, not unique, so putting Gravitas on like an Uchi katana or Nagakiba is just going to be better. And its heavy attack is just going to be a worse version of like a regular heavy attack because 1, they do the exact same stance damage, and poking attacks are just going to be better because like the heavy attack is a downward chop. That's 1 is a vertical swipe, and your light attacks already get vertical swipes. So why would I want my heavy attack to be the exact same swing? I want to have variation in my moveset, hence me preferring Nagakiba a lot more with its heavy attack moveset. One thing it should have had was the downward slam, the Ichimonji attack from Sekiro. If that heavy attack was the weapon skill instead, and it did like some cool like downward slam gravity attack, that'd have been so cool. Why couldn't they just do that? And it's like leave the regular katana moveset, just make the downward slam a cool like gravity weapon skill, and then we would have had like an S tier weapon. But we didn't. We have a Gravitas and then an average heavy attack. That's really sad. Anyway, the Moon Veil's an S tier though. Moon Veil is S tier. S tier. It's basically just like Unsheath, but just it turns it into a projectile instead with the weapon. But yeah, it gets like a really good dexterity and intelligence-based scaling. Still retains bleed, because why not? And yeah, the weapon skill is Transient's Moonlight, which is like a reskinned version of Unsheath. It is going to be like a lot more expensive than regular Unsheath, but like it turns it into a projectile, so it's like really quick. I don't think I like it as much as the Wing of Estelle or Death's Poker in PvE, because these things can just do way more damage and way more stance damage. And they both have like very similar scalings. Like they're both, like all three are dexterity, intelligence based. So like this is still going to be outclassed in my opinion in terms of these two, but like it's still really good. Like you can get all of these three things early on as well. Rivers of Blood, the infamous Rivers of Blood. Yeah, it's overrated, I guess, but it's still pretty decent. I'll probably put it into the B tier. High B tier. Like, if you could get it early in the game, I'd probably value it more. But like, you get it after like every katana in the game, and it performs like worse than like most of them too. Like the weapon skill Corpse Piler is just a reskinned version of Double Slash, but Double Slash can just be better in like almost every instance. Moonveil can bleed, I said that. But yeah, the Nagakiba with Double Slash is just going to be better because the weapon part actually does get, obviously like the weapon model is longer than the Rivers of Blood, and the Rivers of Blood got nerfed to the point where only the weapon part actually does the good damage. And if the weapon part is where most of the damage is going to be coming from, then you might as well go with the weapon that has longer range. But the benefit of Rivers of Blood is that it does get that projectile part that kind of like doubles or triples the range. And it doesn't do like amazing damage anymore, but it still does like chip damage, some nice blood loss build up. And against enemies like Millennia, it still is going to be very good. It's still nice to use, still very easy to use as well. Another thing, it does consume like 3 times as much FP as Double Slash does with like a regular katana. So yeah, I feel like if they were going to nerf it, they should have probably like nerfed, or should have like made the FP cost a bit cheaper. But it's still going to get heavy use because it looks really cool. The Dragon Scale Blade. Probably also going to be a B tier, probably a high B tier as well. It's a weapon that just gets strength and dexterity scaling. The total overall damage is not going to be that crazy high. Its weapon skill is a reskinned version of Lightning Slash. But it's going to be an Ice Lightning version. So it's going to give it Frost as well as a bunch of lightning damage, and it's like 160 lightning damage and 80 frost build up, which is very nice. Although the Dragon Halberd is just going to like be better because it gets like a better moveset. And it also gets like faster light attack combos. Not faster, but the better light attack combos with those poking attacks instead. But it does swing faster, so like it's going to be a nice use. I wish it was kind of like a different reskin skill and not lightning slash, but like something different. It's still pretty cool though. One thing I wish is that it retained bleed. It should have retained the bleed that like all the other katanas had, because it wouldn't have been broken if you had like 50 blood loss build up and just have like the weapon skill boost 80 frost build up. That wouldn't have been broken. Because going with like a frost-based infused Uchi-Katana or a Nagakiba does like the exact same thing, kind of. So like, it should have kept bleed. Yeah, I might put maybe A tier. Anyway, Hand of Millennia. This one might go into the A tier as well. I'm not sure. Maybe B tier. I don't know, we'll see. Okay, I'll talk about it and then I'll decide. But yeah, the Hand of Millennia does get some of the most range. Out of all the katanas, it gets the second most range. Does get a very decent dexterity scaling, does get very high requirements, but by the time you get it in the game, you're going to be at that level anyway. Its weapon skill, Waterfowl Dance, is very high damaging for not much FP. I think like the entire combo is like less than 30, but it outputs like amazing damage. Actually does do more damage against those like larger types of bosses because it kind of like swings all around. And it can actually like melt larger bosses really quickly. Now the problem with Waterfowl Dance is that one, you don't get any hyper armor. Like basically no hyper armor. You get hit one time, straight to the ground. Two, it consumes a lot of stamina, like a lot of stamina. If you're going to use the entire combo, you're going to have like no stamina left. So yeah, and obviously the fact that it's a longer animation means that it's going to be more situational. So against those enemies that can get staggered, it's going to be really good. But against those enemies that cannot get staggered, it's not going to be good unless it's like a larger boss. So the fact, it's probably B tier then, yeah. High B tier. But it is still really good. It probably should have had like something else. Like it should have had like a little bit of health regen per hit. Maybe specifically just for the weapon skill. Maybe a bit more blood loss build up, because it does get bleed, but it doesn't proc bleed that quickly. Especially with the weapon skill. You think with like as many times as it's hitting, you think it proc bleed quickly, but it doesn't. So yeah, probably B tier then. Anyway, getting into the Twin Blades. Oh my god. I have lots of opinions on Twin Blades. It's a PvE list. Yeah, Twin Blades, they're going to be... Okay, typically I don't really like Twin Blades that much because like their animations for like their light attack combos and their heavy attacks tend to be pretty long. The way to use them is going to be like two-handed because they can swing multiple times, of which they're best paired alongside like the multi-hit talismans, of which that where can help them make them shine. But the thing is, like a lot of power stance dexterity weapons kind of just worked better. Because even the power stance combos with the Twin Blades are kind of just like mid outside of the jumping attack. Obviously, the jumping attack is like incredible. It's probably the best attack in the entire game, the power stance jumping Twin Blade, because it's the exact same thing as the curved swords, but being that Twin Blades just do more damage and have a bit more range, it's just going to be better. So like you can literally just spam power stance jumping attacks and make all the Twin Blades very viable. But in terms of like the rest of their movesets, it's not that good except for like the running attacks. The running heavy attack specifically is really quick. But yeah, these things also just get very mid stance damage. Like their light attack combos quite literally get just as much stance damage as a straight sword. I think they get less stance damage than a straight sword, which is dumb. I don't know why that is the case. And even their heavy attacks, with as many times as it swings, what the fuck is this? I'm talking here. Ad block, the fuck? Anyway, as many times as it swings, it still gets just as much damage or stance damage as a straight sword. But like the whole purpose is to like hit multiple times to proc the status effects and proc the multi-hit talismans. Anyway, there's a lot of yapping about the Twin Blades. The regular Twin Blade, I'll probably put this one into the B tier. The only purpose of this Twin Blade would be to put it in your offhand to power stance if you wanted to get like a Godskin Pillar, because I think this is the only other dexterity one, because there's 2 dexterity and 2 strength-based ones that can be infused. So if you were to go with a dexterity type of build, you could put this one in your offhand next to the Godskin Pillar. That's going to be its only use, because the thing is, all of these weapons, all the ones that can be infused, you can only get one per playthrough. And if power sensing is the best way to build around the twin blades, you're going to have to use like almost every single one of these anyway. The twin knight sword is like the exact same thing. It's just going to be the strength based version instead. You're just going to put this one in the offhand when you have the gargoyles until you go to New Game Plus, then pick up a second gargoyles. The Godskin Pillar is probably going to be the best one to use just one-handed. Oh, not one-handed, just two-handed and not power stance, because it does get the cool poking attacks with like the heavy and the running heavy, which is pretty cool. Although like I don't really like twin blades two-handed because of their like longer animations and stuff, but like ending in a heavy attack is going to be really cool. Another thing with the heavy attacks of the twin blades is that, like, it swings around a whole bunch, and like the first like few hits do like next to no damage, and all the damage comes off the last swing. So like, it's good to proc the multi-hit talismans, but if you get staggered in that animation, which is very likely, or if an enemy dodges, you're missing out on a lot of damage. But Godskin Pillar gets some nice damage, so that's going to get a high A tier. The gargoyles, like, these are all like situational. Like if you're going power stancing gargoyles, it's going to be like broken. So like I can put it into the broken tier, and I'll put it A tier because like by itself, it's not good. I put a caveat there. If you have these power stance with something else and just spam jumping attacks, it's going to be broken. Although the rest of the power stance twin blade combo is not that good for PvE. But yeah, like it's kind of hard to rank the twin blades because they're still situational. Basically, just listen to what I said. Just listen to what I said. Don't worry about where I ranked them. Anyway, getting into the ones that can be infused. The Gargoyle's Black Blade is garbage, trash. Yeah, trash. All the Gargoyle Black weapons, barring the Gargoyle Black Blade, the Greatsword, is actually like just terrible because they get no unique skills and they get terrible scalings. And all get really bad range. Like the Gargoyle weapons always have terrible range. These things get split holy damage and a descaling in Faith. Don't know why none of these things actually had like a unique skill, like some cool destined death effect with their skill. That's kind of stupid. Yeah, these things are just garbage. Eleanor's Pole Blade. Oh, God. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you're going to build around twin blades, the best way to do it is using power stance jumping attacks. With the Eleanor's Pole Blade, it's good. It's good with the power stance jumping attacks. But it's not optimal. So if you're just going to build and only spam jumping heavy attacks, you better stop going with either gargoyles or Godskin. Whether you have them strength, heavy infused, or bleed infused or not, it doesn't matter. It's going to be good either way. People always think that just using bleed-based jumping attacks is going to be good. It doesn't matter. But if you were to go bleed, going with like the Twin Blade and Godskin Pillar is going to do more damage and do more blood loss build-up than using the Eleanor's. But you'd use the Eleanor's because the weapon skill does have good synergy, or does actually work well against those smaller types of enemies that can get staggered. Because that's basically its only purpose. I might put it into the A tier. Because like, well, it's still like a regular twin blade. So like it's going to have those longer animations. It's going to get less stance damage than the straight sword. The heavy attacks swing longer than a regular twin blade heavy attack. And they also do the same stance damage as the straight sword. But obviously it's going to swing multiple times, so it's going to proc bleed pretty nicely. But like the heavy attack is just going to be outclassed by the weapon skill. Which the weapon skill is like really high damaging for not much not high damaging. It's really high stance damaging for not much FP. It does have like a longer animation, and it doesn't really get much hyper armor. But like the major problem with the weapon skill is that it doesn't get good stance damage. It doesn't get good damage, it gets good stance damage, I mean. It does like upwards of 60 stance damage for the entire combo. But the damage output is not that good. Like it really isn't. Like if you're fighting Millennia, obviously because she's weaker to fire damage, it's going to melt her and it's going to stun lock her. But against those enemies that can't get staggered, you're going to really notice, hey look, this one is not going to be melting the enemies the same way. That's what I noticed, at least when I did my runs with the Eleanor's Pole Blade. I've used it like plenty of times, and the damage output is not that good in terms of its skill, but it does do high stance damage, which I guess is going to be its only use. Anyway, Twin Blades are a very like weird category. Weird category. Anyway, so it does seem like this list is pretty like top heavy, but that doesn't matter because we're coming up to a bunch of mediocre trash soon, so the list is going to balance out. keep hearing this weapon uses smithing stones, so it can be infused, but I infused my Bloodhound, which uses... No, you're confusing infused with buffed. When you buff a weapon, that means you add a buff onto it. Infused means that you can change the scalings and change the affinity. Anyway. Axes. Probably one of the worst weapon types in the entire game for PvE. Because they get pretty poor range. They get pretty poor movesets. They just get standard damage. Yeah. It's mainly because of their movesets and their speed. Like, at this range, you could use things like straight swords, curved swords, basically all like the smaller types of weapons, and those output way more DPS and probably even like just as much stance damage, because like some of the weapon skill options aren't going to be that good. So yeah, axes are kind of mediocre in that regard. And they're typically just outclassed by hammers as well, because like hammers do like basically the exact same moveset, very similar damage, but they just get striking damage instead, which is just better than standard damage, and they get higher stance damage, which in PvE is going to be way more useful. But for the hand axe, this actually does get a faster moveset than most of the other axes. It swings pretty quickly, but it has really bad range, like really, really bad range, to the point where I really never want to use it. So I put that into the C tier. The forked hatchet is basically the exact same thing, but just even worse range, but it gets bleed, which obviously that's really cool if you can swing faster and get bleed. But at this range, you might as well just use a claw, because like claw weapons also get bleed and swing faster and have basically the same range, probably even lunge further, and probably get better weapon skill options too. So that's like also going to be a C tier. The range is really trash. The battle axe is also going to be just a very mediocre axe. It gets like average damage, average moveset. You get it like right at the beginning. But as I mentioned, axes are very mediocre. So it's going to be just another fat C tier. Do not really care about this one much. Finally, a good weapon, the warped axe. This one's good. This one is good. I put this one comfortably into the A tier. Gets a really good strength scaling, even with like lots of different infusions. If you have this thing like a bleed infused, it still retains an A scaling in strength, which is really good. It gets a unique light attack combo to where like the follow-up attacks swing like really quickly. So like the combos are really nice, good damage. It pairs nicely along with certain status effects, but it still is going to be an axe, so it's just regular standard damage. It's not going to really compare nicely or like outplay a lot of the other types of smaller weapons like curved swords or straight swords. But it is still going to be better in terms of stance damage when compared to those things. The jawbone axe. Okay, this one is going to be one of the higher damaging or higher damaging axes. And it does get striking damage as well, which is unique to the axes. It's like the only axe that does get striking damage, which in most cases you'd think and look compared to like the hammers, because they're also like the exact same moveset and they get striking damage too. But hammers just get more stance damage. But the thing is with the jawbone axe, when axes in particular, they just get a bit more base damage than regular hammers. So it can just out damage all the other hammers and also just do striking damage. So you're kind of picking and choosing between either stance damage or just more damage. And axes also do get more Ash of War options. You can get things like Spinning Slash and something else. I forget what else that you can get with an axe that you can't get with a hammer. So it is going to be somewhat useful. I might put it high B tier. It's like very situational. Sword Dance, yeah. Sword Dance is one. I'm not sure if I'd really ever use it over a hammer though, because I'd rather have the high stance damage. Like if I'm going to go with these like smaller weapons that don't really swing as fast as straight swords, I'd rather just go into stance damage, of which hammers just do it way better than axes. The Iron Cleaver. This one also does get some nice damage. It does get a unique light attack combo with a bunch of overhead slams. But the thing is, the overhead slams, I checked the frame data, it's like identical speeds. Like the speeds are not even that much faster. Like not even faster than anything else. It's like a bunch of chopping attacks, and I'd probably just rather have the horizontal swipes because it's better for hit detection. But it does get a unique heavy attack to where it lunges really far, and it does like this cool like running animation, which can close the distance pretty nicely, can do some very nice damage. You can pair this alongside some charged heavy attack builds, and it can make for a pretty cool combo. But it is going to be a longer animation compared to a regular heavy attack, so it's probably a bit more situational. But it is really funny, so... but if I'm going to think about it objectively, I think B tier is as high as it can go. The Highland Axe. Highland Axe. This is going to be just another regular axe with average damage, average moveset, average everything basically. It just gets the benefit of boosting your raw-based Ashes of War attacks. So when using things like Beast Raw, or using things like Braggart's Raw, Regal Raw, and just putting this in your offhand, it's going to just boost the damage of those Ashes of War and those particular heavy attacks. I think it's by like 10%, and it does like stack with the Raw Medallion, so that's going to be its only use. Like I would never use this as a primary based option. You just put it in your offhand and just leave it there. So yeah, I think it's just a solid B tier. This is not in order. How long have you been here? This list is not in order. I'll order it at the end, okay? Jeez, we were arguing about like the ordering of the trash tier, like really? Oh, I can't believe like this one is above this one. Like who cares? They're all garbage. Jeez. Anyway, the Celebrant Sickle, trash as well. I'm pretty sure it gets the same moveset as the Iron Cleaver, but it just gets worse damage. But the trade-off being is that I'm pretty sure you get runes on hits, right? It's like 10 runes per hit. And it's like, yeah, who cares? Who cares? It's terrible. It's high trash. I'm sorry, I put the cane sword higher. Is that better now? Okay. Anyway, yeah. Sacrificial Axe. This one gets like just as bad a range as like the Hand Axe, but it doesn't get the faster moveset. But the only benefit that this one has is that it can get FP per kills. I think it's like 2 FP or 3 FP for every single kill, which is like barely anything. I think it's like the Sword of Milos literally gets more. The Sword of Milos gets you like 5 FP per kill. This one actually might be 5 FP as well. I'm not sure. This one actually does get good scalings with elemental infusions. So when you do go spec into like Flame Art infused or Magic infused, you do get nice scalings there. So I guess it's meant to be like a casting type of tool, but it's an axe with terrible range and average damage. So C tier. Anyway, Ice Rind Hatchet. This one also gets the same moveset as the Hand Axe and the Forked Hatchet. It does get Passive Frost, and it does get Hoarfrost Stomp as an Ash of War, although Hoarfrost Stomp is not unique, and you can get more damage with the Hoarfrost Stomp when you put it on other types of weapons. I'm pretty sure you just put like Hoarfrost Stomp on the Hand Axe, and it can just perform better than the Ice Rind Hatchet. But it is an early Sombra-based weapon, so I don't know, just C tier as well, I guess. Hoarfrost Stomp ain't what it used to be, so it can't be that useful anymore. Anyway, the Ripple Blade. This weapon is going to be an arcane-based weapon that can be infused. It's just pure arcane scaling. So going all into arcane is going to be beneficial because you can actually pair this alongside like the Dragon Communion Seal and get a nice damaging option, as well as like spamming a bunch of really cool spells. Although like occult-based bleed weapons are typically just going to be better. But the thing is, with a weapon that can be buffed and that it gets an arcane scaling, you can pair it alongside greases, and actually can help proc those status effects quickly, like Bleed Grease, Sleep Grease, Poison Grease. It can proc them really fast. So you have some nice synergy in status effects. It is going to mainly be for like PvP with its like sleep-based benefits. But the thing is, the Ripple Halberd does like the exact same thing but better because it's a Halberd, which is a better weapon class. So I think I'm going to put it into the C tier because the Halberd is just going to do it better. Anyway. Very situational, because you have to like farm a bunch of greases to do it, so it's like super annoying. The Stormhawk Axe. Oh, God. Stormhawk Axe. Okay, I might... Look, it's very popular in like a lot of challenge runs and stuff because it's a Sombra-based weapon that you can get very early on, and it gets like Thunderstorm, which is like a reskinned version of Stormcaller. But Stormcaller is just going to be better, because Stormcaller, I'm pretty sure, is cheaper. It can do more damage, and it gets more stance damage. Especially if you pair it alongside larger types of weapons. You could put Stormcaller on something like a Great Hammer, a Scythe, a Halberd, and it will just be a better version than this. So I think I'm going to put it into the B tier. It does buff the weapon with more lightning damage. I think it's like 120 more lightning damage, which obviously is also going to be good pretty early on, because obviously it's a flat damage buff. But the thing is, like the Dragon Scale Blade that I talked about and the Dragon Halberd, the weapon skill is also a damaging skill, but boosted with 160 lightning damage, which is a higher number than 120, and boosted with 80 frost. So it's like, that's going to be a better version of a lightning buff. And Stormcaller is going to be a better version than the damaging skill. So like, but it is going to be like a buff that does have Stormcaller. I don't know. It's like, it does two things kind of well, but like both things that it does is kind of outclassed by something else. Anyway, so I think B tier is like comfortable for it. The Rose's axe is actually pretty good though. Rose is actually pretty good. I put this one solid into the A tier. It's actually a pretty decent strength-based weapon. Does get split intelligence scaling. Split magic damage too. But I'm pretty sure the weapon skill just scales off your AR, of which you can just go all into strength. Get some okay amounts of damage, but the weapon skill is going to be the best part. Rose's summons, which is going to be like kind of like Tibia summons, but it's actually like very decent damage. Like it's way better than Tibia summons because it's actually a pretty quick animation. Even if you get hit, the skeletons are still guaranteed to come out. It's only 15 FP, and it does pretty decent damage. And it can stun lock those smaller enemies too. If you guys haven't used Rose's Axe, I recommend that you do. It's actually pretty good. Answer chat. I'm not talking to chat right now. There's like hundreds of people in here talking to me. I want to focus on doing this. I'm not talking to you guys. Go away. I'll go ask questions at the end. Or answer questions at the end. But yeah, Rose's Axe is actually pretty decent. Pretty decent. Anyway, that is the axes now done. Great axes time. Okay, so now the great axes, kind of similar to how I see like the regular axes compared to like the hammers. Like same deal. Probably not as like big of a discrepancy though. But yeah, typically great axes, I wouldn't really like them as much as great hammers. Because great hammers can just get striking damage, which is better than standard damage, and just get more stance damage too. I think the great axes get just as much as like colossal swords, and I think it's like 38 stance damage for a charged heavy attack or 37 stance damage, whereas like great hammers can get like 42 or 43 stance damage for a charged heavy, which is like obviously better. But they actually do get some different Ash of War options like Spinning Slash and Sword Dance, and I think Vacuum Slice as well, which great hammers cannot get that. Anyway, the regular great axe. This one is just going to... Does this one actually get the highest... I don't think it gets the highest damage. I think the Executioner's does. But it's just like average range, average damage. Does have a nice design, but like... very average at best. So it's like going to be a B tier. The Crescent Axe is going to have a cool heavy attack. Does get that nice like horizontal swipe for a heavy, which is going to be pretty cool for hit detection. I can value it somewhat, although like not that much. It actually does get some of the most range, I believe, in class. Might put it high B tier. Not too bad. The long haft axe. I'm pretty sure it gets higher. It's just going to be a better version than the regular great axe, I believe. But it still is going to be a regular great axe. Like this thing is, all these great axes perform very similar in terms of like range and moveset. So like the one that's going to do like the most damage is going to be the best one. Of which the Executioner's great axe is just going to be better than like almost everything else. Crescent at B. I mean, like this is a PvE list. If there's like a PvP list, then it might get higher. But like there's not really much of a benefit of using it in PvE. The Executioner's great axe though is great. S tier. Pretty sure it gets like the most damage and it gets like the most range. And it gets 115 crits, which that's obviously really good. So I think it gets... yeah, S tier is nice for it. I'm pretty sure it's the most range. I haven't really played with the great axes in a while, clearly. The Omen Killer Cleaver... I probably also put it into the B. Like, it's a great axe that gets bleed, which obviously is really good. But the thing is, long haft is the best range. Yeah, it's probably still going to get a B, though. Farming it is annoying. Anyway, why am I talking to you guys? Distracting me. Yes, the Great Omen Killer Cleaver is just going to be outclassed by the Great Stars. Like, the Great Stars does everything this does, but just better. Because Great Stars can just do basically just as much damage, have, like, just as much range, also gets bleed, but it gets striking damage, and it gets health regen per hit. But, as I mentioned before, Great Axes do get different Ash of War options. So if you wanted to use things like Sword Dance or Vacuum Slice, maybe it could be a better option. But if I'm going to use these large weapons, I'm going to use something like Wild Strikes, which I guess is like better to have than or Wild Strikes or Stormcaller, which I think is better to have than Sword Dance in my opinion. So, Rusted Anchor though is an S tier. Hell yeah, boy! This is gonna be like your highest damaging, one of the highest damaging weapons in the entire game, because it's a very big boy with high AR and it gets piercing damage, which not only is piercing damage the best damage type based on enemies' defenses, because a lot of enemies are weaker to that damage type, but obviously counter attack damage. And when enemies are in the middle of like attack combo, it's just going to get like this boosted damage. You can pair it alongside the Spear Talisman, and it could just make for stupid amounts of damage. Yeah, I'm going to turn this into a YouTube video. I'm just going to condense it. Not condense it, but like just cut it and just paste it. Basically, what's it called? The Sacred Butchering Knife, right? This is yet another weapon that is outclassed by the, what do you call it? The Great Stars. It's just going to be a Great Axe with health regen. Whereas the Great Stars is a Great Hammer, which is better. That gets health regen and gets bleed. So this thing should have got slashing damage. It doesn't get slashing damage. That would have been actually unique because it gets regular standard damage, which I don't really understand. So yeah, B tier. B tier. It's a dex weapon there. That makes it even worse. Because they have like what do you call it? Strength, higher strength requirements with these Great Axes. So you have to spec into like a decent amount of strength. It's probably not that high. It's probably like 18 or 19. But like you have to spec into a decent amount of strength just to use a dexterity weapon. Is kind of stupid. Yeah, there's no reason to use it. Anyway, the Gargle Axes. Oh god. Right. Okay, why am I reading chat? I need to stop. Okay, the Gargle Great Axe gets terrible range, very mediocre. I think it's like some of the highest damage, but like the range is so bad that like I would never really want to use it under any circumstance. It's just like awful. And then the Gargoyle Black Axe is even worse. I'd probably put this one into the trash tier. This one can go into the fucking D tier. Fuck you. Yeah, the Gargoyle Black Axe is just another one with this a descaling in faith, can't infuse it, non-unique skill, awful range, split holy damage. These things are terrible. The Winged Greathorn. You'd only want to use this weapon as for its buff, which is very similar to like the Sword of Milos. Where did I put the Sword of Milos? I'm going to put it right next to it. I'll put it into the A tier. Put it into the B tier. I think I value the Sword of Milos debuff a little bit more because the weapon has like lower requirements and it does get the benefit of giving you FP regen per kill. So like leaving this one in the offhand is going to be better. This debuff might be easier to pull off because it's like an AoE and enemies can just like walk into it. And I think it like lasts longer. But the weapon is going to have higher requirements and it's going to weigh more. So maybe like it's going to be more situational in terms of what build that you pair it alongside with. But it is still going to be like a nice debuff though. Like the only downside is that you have to like have a little bit of faith and strength and dexterity and just constantly switch back and forth. Why is the axe low? This one? Because Hoarfrost Stomp is not a unique skill. You can put it on any weapon and it'll be better than this. That's why. The Axe of Godric. Another mediocre weapon. Probably comfortably into the low B tier. Fuck it. C tier. Okay, so it gets like another strength and dexterity scaling. Can't be infused, so it's not going to have good synergy with spells. Its heavy attack is going to be the same thing as the Crescent Axe, which is a good heavy attack. It's pretty decent. Nice horizontal swipe. But the thing is, the skill I commands thee kneel doesn't really do that good of damage. The weapon and the range isn't that good either. The hyper armor can be somewhat okay. The whole animation is like very long. And most of the damage comes off that third swing. Like it does like more damage than like the first two parts combined. And if you do the entire combo, it's actually really good damage for not much FP. But like no enemy is going to be staying around long enough to let you get the entire combo off. It's just like not going to happen. It's not that bad. It's pretty B tier though. Pretty what B tier. It's not that bad. You can get staggered out of it pretty quickly. You get like a little bit of hyper armor, not much. But if you did get the entire combo off, it does feel pretty nice. But like using the Crescent Moon Axe with like a different weapon skill is going to be better because it gets like the same moveset. But I still don't really like Great Axes that much. Justice for the Crescents? Nah, I'm not a Great Axe fan. I know, we'll see. Look at it at the end of the list, or at the end of the video. we'll go rearrange it and stuff. Anyway, hammers. Probably my personal favorite weapon type. Not based on performance, but like based on like aesthetic, because they're really cool and stuff. Small little bonking sticks that can do high stance damage. Very fun. That's basically their only benefit though. Like if you're going to be using great hammers, you're kind of just speccing into like either a guard counter build or a charged heavy attack build, because they do them pretty quick and do high amounts of stance damage. Trying to spam like light attacks, it's just always going to be worse than like curved swords and straight swords. Yeah, because their movesets are not that fast. Anyway, the regular club, it's just going to get a C tier. Because this is going to be one outclassed by the stone club, even though you have to farm for that one. It does get the unique downward chops, but the thing is, I looked at the frame data. Those attacks are like literally slower than like the regular light attack combos, but like the side to side swipes. I'm pretty sure the frame data shows that like it's like a frame or two slower. It's not even like that much. It's not even faster. And thank you for the 5 gifted, Ribbit. If I'm not checking like alerts and stuff, it's because I'm not seeing them, because all the alerts are off and things. I'll say the more and thank everyone at the end. Anyway, what am I doing? Yes, the curved club is just going to be like outclassed by like the spiked club, because it's like the same moveset, but it just doesn't get bleed, and it gets like the same amount of damage. So like that can also get into the C tier, and it's like a hammer. So like not really much of a point to use it. Yeah, the spikes can get into the B tier, although it is going to get bleed. It's going to be outclassed by the morning stuff, because that one just gets a better moveset. And I think it can just get more damage with certain types of infusions, because I don't think this one gets as good as like elemental scalings. The stone club, I'm probably like, I want to like the stone club because it's really funny, but like those light attacks literally they're not faster. They're like actually like just as fast, or maybe like slower than a regular heavy hammer attack. And I'd rather have the horizontal swipes, because it's better for hit detection, better at hitting multiple enemies, like less chances to miss. Because like your heavy attacks also do a downward slam, so like there's no variety there with the moveset. But it does get to the most amount of range, I'm pretty sure. Out of all, or not the most amount, but out of the ones that can be infused, I'm pretty sure it gets the most. No, the hammer gets more range. Second most range, but it does get the highest amount of base damage too. So, but then again, I did say like going with a charged heavy attack build is going to be the best thing. So maybe an A tier. I lie. So if charged heavy attacks is going to be the best way to use great regular hammers, then the stone club is going to be very valuable. A tier for the stone club. The mace. Really cool, but there's not really much of a point to use it over the Morningstar, because bleed is so good in this game, and that little bit of AR difference is going to be better, and Morningstar gets the better moveset as well. So I think the mace can get a C tier. Because I'm pretty sure like even it gets the same moveset as like the spiked club. I think the spiked club gets like a slightly different heavy attack, but I think it's still a horizontal swipe or something. I forget what it is. Or a diagonal swipe. But yeah, the Morningstar is really good though. This one might be the best one that can be infused. It's still like I don't think I put it into the S tier though. Okay, but the reason why the moveset is better is because it actually does get poking attacks. It doesn't get piercing damage, but it does get like poking attacks. With the running heavy attack, the rolling attack ends the last combo of the light attack, of which when the light attack combos come out, the last poking attack actually does have a faster animation, of which obviously is going to result in as higher DPS. So the fact that your light attack combos are faster, your heavy or your running heavy attacks, and your crouching attacks are just going to be quicker than most other hammers, and you're going to get bleed. It's going to be cool, but yeah, once again, light attack combos of hammers are just going to be outclassed in terms of DPS compared to most other weapons, but like the stance damage is pretty good. It actually does get piercing damage. It doesn't say it on the weapon though. Are you sure? You might be right. You might be right. Anyway, moving on. The wall pick. Not good. Not good, not good. I'm pretty sure this one does get piercing damage despite what it says. What was I saying? Yes, but the damage is not that good, and the range is like horrendous. Like it's like the worst range in class by a lot, which sucks because like it looks really cool. It should have had like a unique moveset or something as well. So I probably put it like, it still gets piercing damage. I'd probably put it into like the B tier or something. Like the range is like super bad though. Whatever, I put it into the B tier. It is really light. I think it's like 2.5 units. If I had like a couple more inches. Can relate. Moving on. The regular hammer. This one gets the most range compared to all of the other ones that can be infused. It gets like average damage though for the most parts. But I might still prefer it more so than like all the other hammers due to its like a little bit more range. So that's cool. I probably put it nicely into the B tier. I'm putting a lot of things into like the C tier for no reason. I don't know. What I'm saying is what really matters. The Monk Flame Mace gets a very funny heavy attack. Don't know why it doesn't get bleed though. It's kind of odd. The heavy attack, I think it does more damage than like a regular heavy attack than most other hammers get. But like the animation is like longer for like no reason. I know it's funny and all, but like it's still like going to be a C tier because if you're like a hammer, the best thing is going to be your charged heavy attack, and if it's just going to do it longer, then no. Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't get bleed. One thing that does get bleed is the Vari's Bouquet, which is quite literally the worst weapon in the entire game. There is nothing that gets as bad damage as this. This thing is beyond horrendous. Like, the base damage of this thing at plus 10 is like 108 or 109 or something like that. A maxed out dagger literally gets more damage. It's like super, super trash. Like, it does get bleed and it can be buffed. But like, that's where all of your damage is going to be coming from, bleed. And if all your damage is coming from bleed, that's not a good thing. Like, I promise you. If you think I'm lying, go use this weapon and do a complete playthrough with it, and you will understand. I don't know why this thing doesn't get a unique skill as well. It could have had some like cool like flower-based projectile attack or something, but it gets a blood tax. Why does a hammer get blood tax? Don't know. But this is literally the worst weapon in the game. It just gets really bad damage. Really bad damage. Remember when everyone cried that was an online-only weapon? So trash. The Envoy's Horn, though, is actually not trash. It's actually pretty decent. I like the Envoy's Horn. I'm going to put this one into the A tier. Because, one, it gets projectile attacks that can be spammed pretty quickly, and that are very cheap. I think it's like 6 FP for every single holy bubble, which, yes, the bubble isn't going to be like the most or highest damaging thing in the world, but it gets very good tracking, and it's a quick animation for very cheap. And with like a lot of buffs, it actually can do some nice damage. Like, it's just a very easy to use weapon that has like a high amount of upside. Obviously, it's split holy damage, and the bubble is going to do pure holy damage, which is not that good. And I think the weapon does get pretty average scalings as well. But like the bubbles are unironically not even that bad. Unless you're using it against like Radagon and stuff, then they're terrible. But in that case, it's doing striking damage. Radagon's wicked striking damage. Just spam heavy attacks. You'll be fine. The Noxus Flowing Hammer. The Noxus Flowing Sword is just like a better version. Like, the funny thing is, the Noxus Flowing Sword, like the curved sword, where did I put it? I forget where I put it. The weapon skill literally gets more stance damage than this. I don't know why the curved sword weapon gets more stance damage than the hammer that's like swinging twice and slamming to the ground. That makes no sense. It does like stagger enemies nicely because it does like flatten them to the ground, but like the stance damage is like really bad. I don't know what it is exactly. I think it's like 15 to 16 stance damage, and I think the curved sword does like close to 20 stance damage. No idea what's going on there, and it does it in like a longer animation, but it still suffers from the same thing as the Nox Flowing Curved Sword does. There it is. And that's, it just gets strength and dexterity scaling and gets pretty mid overall damage. Like, if it could be buffed, I'd probably like it more, because it definitely does lack damage. It gets a decent strength scaling though, but I think it's just like a worse version of the Noxus Flowing Sword, honestly. It's limp as well. It's limping over. The Ringed Finger. It should have had piercing damage. Like, that fingernail looks like it's pretty sharp. But it still gets striking damage though. But yeah, the weapon skill does like, you know, extend the thing and like it flicks enemies. The thing is, the weapon skill is probably just going to be outclassed by like the heavy attack in most cases. Because I'm pretty sure like a charged heavy attack build is going to probably do more damage in a faster animation and do more stance damage. But the benefit of the weapon skill is that it can send enemies flying and it can stun lock them. So again, this specifically like the smaller enemies. So when they're up against you, you can like use the skill and they can flick them to the ground, and then you can just pro combo the heavy attack afterwards, or just infinitely stun lock them with the weapon skill. So it is going to be more situational, because obviously that is not going to work against larger enemies. There's like no point of using it. And it does give it a lot of hyper armor as well. So like it is a lot easier to use. So if you go up against enemies that are pretty quick, that can be nice. But like if you have an opening, the charged heavy attack is going to be better. But the skill does give it nice utility. So I guess B tier is nice. Probably high B tier. The Scepter of the All-Knowing. This should have been so much more than what it was. Should have either had like be a weapon catalyst, or like, I don't know, something different. Be a faith intelligence weapon. That'd have been cool. But as it stands right now, it's just like a mediocre intelligence weapon that gets like average magic damage. Does get the most amount of range in class, and it actually does get the same moveset as the Morningstar, which is pretty nice. But yeah, the weapon skill is just going to be a debuff that debuffs enemies holy and magic damage, makes them take 10% more holy and magic damage. Which 10% is not that much, especially because like, you know, you have to spec into a decent amount of like stats just to wield this thing. And it also debuffs you as well. Like you take 10% more magic and holy damage, which is kind of stupid, but I'm just going to put this into the C tier. Yeah, C tier is comfortable. Because like the debuff is pretty useful, I guess. Wait, wait, I forget now. I'm pretty sure like the debuffs that you get with the Sword of Milos and the Winged Greathorn, I'm pretty sure that's just all damage, right? That debuffs all damage? I don't know. Anyway, Marika's Hammer is an S tier. Best hammer in the game. That's all I know. Yeah, Marika's Hammer splits magic and splits holy damage, physical damage. Does get a pretty decent strength-based scaling. And the thing is, when you go all into strength, you just get mainly physical damage, so that holy damage is not going to be that big of a deal. And the weapon skill, one, also does scale off your AR. So your skill can actually do mainly physical damage, does get infinite hyper armor, so you're like never going to get staggered out of it. The recovery frames are pretty quick, so you can roll out of it pretty quickly. It doesn't consume much FP. I think it's like 20 FP or 19, something like that. And it does amazing stance damage. Like if you hit with this thing directly, I think it does like 40 something stance damage, like 42 stance damage, which that is like literally more than Lion's Claw on the Guts as a Greatsword. That's more stance damage. If you hit with it point blank. If you hit with like just the AoE, it's going to be less. But the fact that it has like a very large AoE is obviously really good, because you can like redirect it, hit multiple enemies at once. Against smaller enemies, it sends them flying. It's just so easy to use, and it just shreds enemies. It's just really good. It's really good. It's the best one. It's the best one. You can look at it as like a Lion's Claw, but like in an AoE. You could just look at it like that. It's amazing. You know what's not amazing? Flails. They fucking suck. Awful weapons. Yeah, the reason why flails are terrible is because they're literally identical to hammers. Like they're a new weapon class in the series, but they're just the exact same things as hammers. But they just get worse movesets, because like the best thing about hammers is like their stance breaking potential with the heavy attacks, and this thing just gets an abnormally, like a just terribly long heavy attack for no reason. Awful. They should have had like a unique moveset. It would have been cool if you could like charge up the heavy attack and like walk around with it and use it whenever you want to. And like the charged heavy attack actually did like a lot of damage. Like the more you charge it, I don't know. But like it doesn't really work that way. It would be cool if you could like block and like charge it up at the same time. There could be like so much cool stuff that you could have done with the flails, but they just made them like dexterity hammers, which is kind of dumb. Anyway, they do get bleed though, I guess, which is cool, but like so many other bleed weapons in the game that are just better than this. The regular flail, and these all get like really high requirements too. Like, why does like the regular flail get like an 18 dexterity requirements? I don't know. Yeah, that's can go into the C tier though. You know what? Fucking D tier. I hate the flails so much. I hate them. I hate them. Just go use the Morningstar. They're just better than every single one of these flails. Knight Rider's flails, I'm pretty sure gets like the most damage, I believe. I think it's the highest amount of AR. So being that it gets more damage, I guess that can go into the C tier. Chain link flail, I think, gets better damage on a strength-based infusion. This is better for dexterity. So that can go into the, that can also go into the C tier. Just use the Morning Star. The family heads, though, this one actually doesn't get bleed, but it does get a unique skill in Familial Rancor that actually does shoot out a bunch of these skulls. Actually does do some nice damage. The problem with the weapon is that the weapon skill scales off intelligence, and it gets a D scaling in intelligence. It gets an A scaling in dexterity, which is pretty cool. But family heads actually isn't even that bad. It does some nice damage. It does like more damage than like Ancient Death Rancor. So like I'll literally put it into the A tier. If you just keep spamming the skill, it's gonna be fine. Actually B tier, because it's still flail, and D scaling is kind of cringe. Yeah, B tier. But it's actually not even that bad. I think this skill is like 15 FP. It's pretty decent, and you can like cancel it at any point. It's not like Zamor Curve Sword. Zamor Curve Sword is like broken. Like yeah, Zamor Curve Sword is like really good skill. This is not as good as Zamor. Bastard Stars is like a better version of the skill of family heads. Not a better version, but like I think I like it better as an intelligence-based option. Because the weapon skill does scale off intelligence, and it gets an A scaling in intelligence, which is actually good. It's actually a better intelligence scaling than the Wing of Astel. The skill is like called the exact same thing. It's called Nebula. And I'm pretty sure it consumes more FP though. It does like lunge further than the Wing of Astel, and it has like a wider radius. But the thing is, the Wing of Astel does all of its attacks directly in front of you, and it hits more times. So that the Wing of Astel can literally just do more damage and do more stance damage consistently for less FP. So the Wing of Astel is like just better than this in like almost every way. But the fact that it does lunge further means that it's probably easier to use in certain circumstances. So I'm probably still going to put it into the D tier or B tier. If the Wing of Astel didn't exist, this would be like one of the best skills in the game. I'd probably put it easily into the A or the S tier because like it's that good. But like the Wing of Astel does like almost everything this does, but better, and be a better weapon class as well, with a projectile heavy attack, so. But the skill is still pretty good though. Yeah, all these flails have like high requirements for like no reason. They're just, that's dumb. That's dumb. Charge attack on the Bastard Stars is diabolical. Yeah, like all the charged heavy attacks of these flails, like they do like more damage on average than like a charged heavy attack of a hammer, because like the motion values are just higher because it is a longer animation, but it gets the same 40 stance damage as a hammer. So like, why? Why? Oh, we got a decent ways to go. Anyway, the Great Hammers. These are unironically probably one of the best weapon classes in the game. If you're just not including like looking at their options, I think Great Hammers are like top 3. Like these are just really good. They get the highest stance damage in the game. They get striking damage, and they get pretty quick movesets. Like their light attack combos are pretty fast. Even their power stance combos are good. I think there's basically nothing bad about the Great Hammers. Maybe outside of like variation of movesets, but they do still get vertical swipes and horizontal swipes. Like they're just amazing. Good hyper armor, like everything about them. They don't really weigh that much compared to some other colossal options. I think they're all really good. Now, basically, half of these things are like the exact same thing with like the same moveset. The difference between these 3 things is like basically nothing. I think like the large club gets the most range in class, or some of the most range in class, compared to the ones that can be infused. Gets more range than these 3, but it's just like average damage and average scalings. So I just like put it comfortably into like the A tier. I'm pretty sure the curved great club or the curved large club gets the highest amount of base damage. So with certain elemental infusions, this one might be the best one, and it gets like a little bit less range than the large club. And the Great Mace, I'm pretty sure gets the best scalings. So like at higher levels of strength, this one is probably going to be your best option. So like depending on which one that you really want to go with a particular build, at a respectable range, these are going to be like maybe the main 3 that you probably go with. Although like it's kind of going to be outclassed by this bad boy. The pickaxe is really interesting weapon. This thing does get piercing damage. It just gets a bunch of downward chops with its heavy attack. And its light attack, I probably still wish it retains like the horizontal swipes it gets with the heavy, like the other weapons do, just to have nice variation. It actually can be power stanced with great axes. So you can just pick up the rusted anchor and pick up the pickaxe and just power stance them together. Because they're both going to get piercing damage, and the jumping attack builds are just going to be broken and amazing. But the pickaxe cannot actually be better than the rusted anchor. Rusted anchor can get more damage, but the pickaxe does get higher stance damage. So like depending on what you really want in a weapon, this might be better than the Rastadenko. But Rastadenko does get some more weapon skill options too. So I don't know, they're both going to be S tier either way. Both S tier. Where is the Rastadenko? Put it like right next to it. Put them together. They're cute. Very good stuff. The brick hammer does get not that high a base damage. I think it gets like some of the best scalings though. So maybe like at really high levels of strength, it could outperform even things like the Great Mace. But the range is like that bad to the point where I wouldn't ever really use it. Like the range is like that much worse. That like I'd gladly sacrifice maybe like 5 to 10 points in AR just to have more range. And I think it's like on the heavier side too, maybe. I might be wrong on that one. But the base damage isn't that high. It's only like at really high levels that it can outperform some of the other options. Because at most levels, things like the curved Great Club is going to be better. It is heavier? Okay, cool. Oh god. Oh, I hate these weapons. The Gladiator... Oh, these weapons could have been so much better. Like, do you know that Gladiator weapons? How like when they use it, they get this cool like power stancing combo. And then when we use it, it's just the one stupid ass weapon. Like this could have been some like cool, like unique power stancing hammer. But for some reason, it's a great hammer with like the range of a regular hammer. Yeah, no chains. It could have had the cool chains and throw the weapon and have it return to us. Like, come on. With like a unique like skill. And like the fact that we don't utilize this back part of the weapon and do some like cool like backward swing that can get some piercing damage as well. It's like, why? But yeah, the state of it right now is that these weapons get like some of the worst base damage and like the worst range in class. Actually, not some of the worst base damage. I think it's like average damage, but like just really bad range. To the point I just never really use them. And I don't think they're even like lighter or have like lower requirements than some of the other stuff. Like it's just, there's such bad range. The Rotten Battle Hammer is going to be better because it does get Scarlet Rot, despite it getting a little bit less damage. But yeah, I'd rather use this one because Scarlet Rot is still pretty decent. But you trying to proc Scarlet Rot with a Great Hammer is not going to be like the best course of action. Because you still only get like 60 Rot build up and it's going to take a while. The Celebrant Skull. Does this have anything good? Like, I honestly forget. This is the same shit as all the other Celebrant weapons. They just get like runes per hit. You can pair this alongside Prelate's Charge for some really cool rune farming, I think, right? Maybe not. I think it's still like time-based, so it probably doesn't even work that way. I don't know. This get like dog shit range, dog shit damage, and... stupid. Anyway, finally, a good weapon. The Great Stars. I wouldn't put broken. I'll put S tier though. High S. High S tier. This weapon is incredible. It gets some of the most base damage, average range, but like this thing gets bleed and it gets health regen, so it just makes it amazing. You can pair this thing alongside so many different types of weapon skills like Wild Strikes, Stormcaller. You can proc bleed really quickly. Obviously paired alongside Blood Flame Blade for some like stupid ass builds. It just makes for a really solid combination. It's like 1% HP per hit, which is pretty decent because you can pair it alongside certain skills to make it give yourself health back really quickly, like Prelate's Charge as well, although Prelate's Charge damage is not good, so... But you can do that if you wanted to get some health back pretty quickly. So yeah. Great Stars is amazing. I'd honestly rather use like Great Stars over like most other Great Hammers. It's not going to get as much like damage, but like the damage difference is not that much to where it's worth passing up for like the bleed and the health regen benefits. Sacred Relic should be unbroken. Now I talked about why it shouldn't be. I will look at it at the end. Anyway, what's this called again? The Great Horn. Is something Great Horn. I forget the name. It's garbage anyway. So C tier. This thing is like an average. I don't know why it doesn't get piercing damage. It looks like it should get piercing damage. It just gets striking damage though. It's just average range. I think it's like some of the worst range. Average damage. And it does get health regen on kills. Health regen? I think it's health regen, right? On kills? Not FP, right? I think it's health regen on kills. I think it's like 3 HP or 3% HP per kill. But like, that gives you 1% per hit. 1% per hit. 3% per kill. And it's the like exact same class. And this one can get more damage as well. And have more range. This thing sucks. You know what doesn't suck though? This bad boy. Yeah. 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 I mean, holy damage, but yeah, holy. Yeah, I mean, yeah. There's a lot of large enemies in this game. Yeah. Okay. So this thing right here is going to be just a split holy faith and strength based weapon. But its weapon skill bubble shower for like 16 FP just destroys everything in the game. Especially larger enemies because those bubbles can like phase through the enemy and just do amazing damage and hit them multiple times. But even against smaller enemies, it still performs very nicely. You get an okay amount of hyper armor. You get incredible stance damage. I think if every single one of those bubbles hit, you could do like upwards of like 60 or 70 stance damage. From my testing, it's just like really good. Yeah, if you go against those larger bosses and it can hit them multiple times, it's probably doing like upwards of 100 stance damage. It's just kind of silly. This thing can just fuck up a lot of enemies. I guess the only downsides of that is going to be holy damage. And that you do have to like sit down on the ground and use the skill. So you're probably going to get hit more times than not when you do use it. But it is going to be like a projectile. So you can just like sit back and just keep spamming it and everything is just probably going to end up being dead. I don't know. I kind of wanted to preserve the, I don't know, broken. I might put it at S tier. Because I don't think it fucks up everything. There might be some bosses that like it's not going to be good against. Whereas like this can fuck up like everything. I don't know. Anyway, moving on. Cranial Vessel Candle Stand. This weapon actually does get some of the most range in class. I think it's like second or third most range. Does get a very good strength and faith-based scaling, split fire damage. I think it can get like some of the highest AR, honestly, out of all the great hammers. This weapon skill can be very high damaging. Like it can just melt a lot of enemies. The problem with the weapon skill is that the animation is like super long. Like you stay there for like a long time after like every single time that you use it, you got to stay there for like an extra like 3 seconds waiting for like these little fireballs to come out, which I hate that. I do not like that at all. If that part of it was removed, this would honestly be like an S tier weapon, probably even a broken weapon. But that animation is a bit too long. But if you do use the entire combo, it can just destroy everything. So I'm still going to put it into the A tier because it is still going to be like some of the highest damage, some of the most range. And it's still a great hammer with like really high damaging skill. So pretty cool, pretty cool. Can you zoom out? Yeah, at the end we'll zoom out and we'll go look at it all and rearrange it and stuff. We're almost there, kind of. I'm dying. Beast Claw Great Hammer. Another holy based weapon. Also strength and faith. I think it's actually like somewhat quality as well. I might be wrong. Its weapon skill is going to be pretty decent. I think it scales mainly off strength though. I don't think it's putting points to faith benefits at all because I think it's physical damage. Does do like a nice horizontal spread with the weapon skill. It can do some nice damage. Doesn't really go that far. I think something like the Blasphemous Blade, it does like a same thing but better. I think I like it similar to how I like the Gargoyle's Black Blade. Might be a bit better than that though. Might like it a bit more. Does do a nice horizontal spread. I don't know, it's pretty cool. I put it into like a pretty high B tier. Charged attacks have much higher motion values for this weapon right here. This weapon. Ash deals slashing damage? Oh, it does, doesn't it? A tier it is. A tier. But it doesn't scale a faith though, right? But it doesn't get that good of a faith scaling. I think it just actually gets a better strength and dexterity scaling compared to its faith scaling. So you probably don't even need to go into faith at all. You could just use it as like a quality-based AoE. Kind of like vacuum slice, but like it just goes in the horizontally. That's kind of cool. This thing is trash though. Garbage. Yeah, Devour Scepter is one of the worst weapons in the game. Actually, I put it into the D tier. Because like the weapon itself is okay because it's still a great hammer. I think it gets the most range compared to all the other great hammers. And it gets like okay scalings. I don't think it gets as much damage as like the Cranial Vessel Candle Stand. And that's going to be like a better fire-based weapon. But this thing has like one of the worst Ashes of War in the game. Like the weapon skill is so unbelievably bad. Devourer of the Worlds for like 35 FP. You get like this stupidly long animation with this like no hyper armor, and it does like some like nice AoE that goes all the way around you, but it gets like such bad damage that it's like laughable. And it's like the only benefit is that you get some health regen, but the health regen sucks too. Like you get more health regen just by hitting one enemy with a blasphemous blade than you do by hitting 3 enemies with the stupid Devourer Scepter. Yeah, and it's a legendary weapon. Yeah, true. It's so ass. And it's like one of the coolest looking weapons in the game. It has such an awesome design. And it's so ass. Makes me so upset. I'm hanging in there. I'm hanging in there. We're surviving. Okay. Colossal weapons. I'm honestly not too big of a fan of the colossal weapons. They tend to be pretty slow, and their stance damage, honestly, on average, isn't even better than great hammers. So like great hammers, I'm probably just going to prefer in most cases because they also just get striking damage, and they honestly just get more weapon skill options. But certain weapon skills like Lion's Claw are probably just going to be best paired with colossal weapons. But they tend to be pretty heavy, and yeah, I'm not really too big on their movesets. Anyway, getting into the Duelist Great Axe. This thing is garbage. Garbage. Awful. Put it into the D tier because this thing is a dexterity based weapon with like a really high strength requirement. I don't know why a colossal weapon is getting a dexterity, like a better dexterity scaling than a strength scaling with like a 20 or 30 strength requirement. That's kind of stupid. And it gets like the worst range and some of the worst damage in class as well. So like, and it still gets like colossal weapon like weight. There's no reason to use this terrible thing. The Rotten Duelist Axe is also going to be a D tier. I know like I value Scarlet Rot at least a little bit, but yeah, good luck trying to proc Scarlet Rot with a colossal weapon. It's like never going to happen. It gets like 60 Rot build up, and yeah, no, just use any other Scarlet Rot weapon, please. Just do it. These things, they're like all the Duelist weapons should have had unique movesets. They don't have any unique movesets. Don't know why. They could have had some cool power sensing potential, like at least a unique power sensing moveset with like another Duelist weapon. I don't know. And you have to farm for them too, I think. They dumb. Don't care. Anyway, the Golem's Halberd also should have had a unique moveset. A unique light attack combo. It does get like the unique horizontal swipe for the heavy, I believe, right? Does get some of the most range in class. It does come passively with Charge Forth, but you can't infuse it with Charge Forth because that's the way the game works. I'll probably still put it into the B tier though, because it still gets some nice range. Some of the most range in class and some like nice damage. So with certain weapon skills, like maybe Prayerful Strike, maybe Lion's Claw, it can be pretty cool. But it should have had a unique moveset. It probably should have had like the crouching poking attacks like the Colossal Swords get. Maybe a different light attack that incorporates a poke, because like it just gets the same light attack combo as everything else, and just the horizontal heavy attack, which is cool, but could have been more. Could have been more. Giant Crusher. Boom. A tier. Maybe S tier. Anyway. Yeah, this thing is like one of the biggest weapons in the game, and it just hits the hardest. Probably harder than everything else. So going into a build that just utilizes like charged heavy attacks, or maybe like this Lion's Claw spam is probably just going to be best paired with the Giant Crusher. Like the obvious downside is that you have to deal with like the Colossal Weapon movesets, and you have to deal with like the weight and the requirements of the Giant Crusher too, because it's like really heavy and lots of strength that it requires. So it's going to have like a lot of stat investment. So it's going to stop me from putting it anything higher. I might put it like lower S tier. But it is like amazing damage though. But like, yeah. Yeah, Roll Not Resolve heavy attack build or Cragblade heavy attack. It's going to be really good. But yeah, it's like pretty heavy though. Not going to be the easiest weapon to use. And there's probably other weapons out there that probably have better charged heavy attack builds as well. The Prelate's Inferno Crozier is just going to be like a worse version in my opinion. Because like, it also gets like the same stance damage and it's like a pretty cool unique heavy attack, but it's just not going to be as high damaging as the Giant Crusher, but it gets like similar requirements and weight So like if you're going to go spec into like that much strength or that much weight, you might as well put a bit more, a few points into those stats and then just use the Giant Crusher instead. So I might just put this one into the B tier. I don't know, it would have been cool, but like, you know, the Giant Crusher just kind of just outclasses it. Unfortunate. Anyway, the Great Club. Actually, not too bad, but it still should have been able to get infused because unfortunately you cannot be infused. You can buff it though, it does get split holy damage. So just pairing it alongside certain types of buffs can just make it output a decent amount. Its heavy attacks does get really high stance damage. I think it gets like just as much stance damage as the Giant Crusher and the Inferno Crosier, but like it does it in a faster animation. So it can like poise break enemies faster than most other weapons can. But it still is going to get like a descaling in Faith, and get a weapon skill in Golden Lands, which is 1, not that unique, and 2, not that good to begin with. Like, it's okay, but it should have been like a unique skill, or just should have been able to be infused. Would have liked it a lot more. But I probably also put this one into the B tier. What, Holy buff? Yeah, like, yeah, the Order's Blade, or like Holy Grease, I guess. As like all you can really put on it, which is going to be like just more damage, but... Okay. What am I doing? Next. Troll's Hammer. This is another weapon that you can't infuse this on, but you can buff it as well. It does get split fire damage. It's like same situation. You just put a fire buff onto it, and it just gets Troll's Roar as its skill, which Troll's Roar is like not the worst skill to have, but it's not unique still. So I'm probably just going to put this one into the C tier. I'm pretty sure Troll's Roar with a lot of other weapons are just going to be better. And then we have this absolute monstrosity. I don't want to talk about this thing. I didn't want to talk about it. I'll talk about it. Okay, why doesn't it get a unique skill? It's like one of like the 5 like split lightning damage weapons in the game, and it doesn't get a unique skill. Like there's thousands of attacks that the stupid Draconic Tree Sentinel has, and it didn't get one of them. Like modders literally like make unique skills for this weapon like every 10 seconds. Why didn't From Software care to like at least just add one into the game? Like I guess like not including it into the base game, but at least have an update and just throw it in there. But like Endure, really? Anyway, Watch Dogs Greatsword. Ain't that bad. This is a very solid, comfortable A tier weapon. Its weapon skill does the scale off weapon level. There's no intelligence scaling because the weapon skill is Sorcery of the Crosier, which actually is like a tracking magic projectile attack that actually has a lot of benefits. 1, does like really nice damage. You're still going to get boosted by magic based things. Does have some nice tracking, and enemies don't actually input read it as well. They don't really like dodge it at all. So against those enemies, like I remember using it against Radagon, he wasn't parrying it a single time. Millennia wasn't dodging it. They just get hit by it. I don't know why that is. Maybe I've got to test it out again, but yeah, it's actually pretty good. You know what's not good though? The Staff of the Avatar. Does actually get some pretty decent scalings though. I think it's like a B in Faith and Strength, but it's split holy damage. So like how good is the AR really going to be? How good is the damage? Not much. And his weapon skill, Erdtree Slam, is just a worse version than Golden Slam. Like Golden Slam is just the exact same thing, but just better because I'm pretty sure it's cheaper and it does more stance damage. And you could put Golden Slam onto a weapon that gets like a better Faith scaling, and it could just do more damage than this shit, so... No, don't care. C scaling. Maybe because it gets decent AR. This thing is also annoying, the Rotten Staff. It does get more rot build up than the Rotten Duelist Axe. I think it's like, this is like 65 rot build up, that's 75. But it's still trying to proc rot with a Colossal weapon. Not going to work out very well. And the worst part of all, it gets the same skill as the Erdtree stuff. Like it gets Erdtree Slam, which is just a worse version than Golden Slam. And this weapon doesn't get a Faith scaling. So like there's no way to improve the damage of Erdtree Slam. Why didn't it get a Scarlet Rot Asher War? Like why didn't it get the Scarlet Rot Erdtree Slam? There's not a single Scarlet Rot Asher War in this game. This could have been the time. D tier. Oh, unbelievable. Okay, Envoy's Great Horn. In like almost every instance, this is going to be outclassed by the Envoy's Longhorn. Because the Envoy's Longhorn can just do more stance damage and just do more damage. But the benefit this has is that it does go further and actually have tracking. because the Envoy's Longhorn doesn't actually have any tracking. So using it at a longer distance is actually going to be better. Still the same FP cost and everything, but it's probably just going to be easier to use because you can just set it further distances, and against those bosses, you can probably cheese them somewhat easier. But like the damage output is obviously nowhere near as good as the Envoy's Longhorn. So I think B tier is respectable. It's respectable. If the Envoy's Longhorn didn't exist, I'd probably put it into the A tier. But there's not really much of a point of using it because it is a colossal weapon as well, and Great Hammers are just a better class. So there is that. Okay, the Geezer's Wheel. Oh my god. I play this game too much. Yes, the Geezer's Wheel. Gonna be a strength, dexterity-based weapon. Its heavy attacks and its weapon skill does spin around a whole bunch. With the one-handed heavy attacks, it makes for an incredible pairing because it spins in the same location. And those things can actually proc the multi-hit talismans, and obviously you can pair it alongside the charged heavy attack things, and it can output a lot of damage. The weapon skill can also output a lot of damage because it spins really fast. Unfortunately, the weapon skill doesn't work with the multi-hit talismans, but it can still shred enemies really quickly. It does actually get bleed, and that can proc it very quickly too. Unfortunately, it's bugged. The weapon skill is bugged against those larger bosses to where it just doesn't spin that fast at all. It spins like at a quarter of the speed, which obviously is like a quarter of the damage. Against those smaller enemies like Millennial or like Knights and stuff like that, it's going to spin really quickly. Especially against like the Godskin Duo, it just fucks them up completely. But against all types of other bosses, just use the one-handed charged heavy attack. It's going to work better. So overall, it actually can output damage pretty nicely and proc bleed pretty quickly. I'd put it into the S tier if it wasn't bugged, but unfortunately it is. So A tier is the best I can do for that one. Okay, Falling Star Beast Jaw. This one did get nerfed very hard. It took a very big hit to its stance damage, but it's still not that bad because it still is a projectile attack that is relatively cheap. I think it's like 13 FP for Gravity Bolt. And you can keep spamming it over and over again. It's going to be like a nice AoE. Does some okay damage. You're never going to proc a stance break like ever with this thing. I think it's like 8 or 7 stance damage now. But the weapon itself is actually pretty good. It's decent strength scaling. You get the most range in class out of all the other colossal weapons. And it gets piercing damage too. You're still going to get the same colossal weapon moveset, which I'm not too big of a fan. But piercing damage, most range, and a decent projectile skill. I think that's enough for it to put it high A tier. I put it like right at the top of the A tier. Maybe S, I don't know. Thunderbolt does do the exact same thing, but this one actually staggers enemies. Thunderbolt doesn't stagger those smaller enemies, and this does it in an AoE attack. So even if enemies slightly move a little bit, they're still going to get hit by it. So it's like a better version of Thunderbolt. Although lightning damage is better though. Sometimes. Anyway, Axe of Godfrey. Another quality-based weapon, or more somewhat quality-based. This thing should have had a much better strength scaling. It gets like a C scaling in strength. Like this thing should be like the poster boy of strength. And it gets a C scaling. Why is that? But its weapon skill, Regal Roar, is actually somewhat decent. You get a nice AoE attack. Does some okay damage, but it turns your heavy attacks into like some unique like charged crazy ass shit that actually can do some nice damage. When you have it uncharged, it's actually a pretty quick animation. Does a nice stomping attack. My problems with the skill or the heavy attack is that it doesn't do good stance damage. The stance damage seems like less or like just as much as like a regular charged heavy attack, but you're doing it in like a much longer animation, even if you include that stomping attack that it gets. So if it did more stance damage and like actually have a better strength scaling, I'd like this thing a lot more. But I think high B tier, maybe lower A tier, maybe high B tier. Because yeah, if you're using like these long, slow weapons, you expect to get a stance break, and it doesn't really do that. So like, it's kind of unfortunate. Kind of unfortunate. Because like even like the Horrorlu's Earthshaker Ash of War does more stance damage than the heavy attacks that this gets, which is kind of dumb. Anyway, moving on to the spears, which this is going to be another really good weapon class. Piercing damage, obviously amazing, but nothing but poking attacks typically means like quicker animations, good range. Paired alongside the Spear Talisman for even more damage. Spears get some of the best, if not the best, power sensing combos in the game. That is really good. Starting off with the short spear. This one does get some of the worst damage in class and probably the worst range. It does get a unique heavy attack and a cool like double poke, which could be good for status effects or like multi-hit talisman procs, but you could just use like the power sensing combos for that. Although power sensing combos can be pretty stamina heavy, it can cost a lot of stamina. So maybe at earlier levels, this might be a better option. So I might just put it into the B tier. The iron spear, unlike the other iron type of weapons, doesn't really get high base damage. It gets like the same base damage as the regular spear. This one's for strength and this one's for dexterity. There's other weapons that can just get more damage, so I'm just going to probably just throw these ones also into the B tier. Like, they're just going to be like mediocre spears that you can just use early on until you find something better. The partisan, also going to be something that's like a pretty decent option that you can get early on that's going to be outclassed by something else. Like, it gets nice slashing damage, it gets a nice horizontal swipe for a heavy attack. In most cases, it's going to be outclassed by the spiked spear because this gets the exact same moveset, the same heavy attack, but it gets bleed instead. But this does get slashing damage, where that one gets striking damage, so it's going to be somewhat of a use. I don't know, there's like, that will have like very slight differences that like, I kind of had to put them all in the B tier, and like, because they're just going to be outclassed by something else. I'm probably going to prefer the spike spear more because the bleed is going to be nice. So I'm going to put the spike spear into the A tier because it is the only spear that does get striking damage, and it does get bleed as well. It probably is going to get outclassed by the cross naginata, but you can only get one cross naginata per playthrough. So if you did want to power stance bleed type spears with an occult infusion, you're probably going to have to pick up the spiked spear as well. The pike can probably just get into the S tier. This gets like just as much damage as all the other spears, but just like 25 million times more range, which is just stupid. Like, I don't know why it didn't take like a hit to damage as a trade-off, but like it just doesn't. It does get like a weird heavy attack though that I don't really care for. That weird like upward poke, because it doesn't really have, like, kind of like lessens the range. It's kind of stupid, but it's still fine. It gets like dumb damage. Or dumb range, so I probably like low. Yeah, that's a healthy spot for the pike. Cross naginata can just go straight to the S tier as well. Gets a very cool light attack combo, gets a mix of slashing damage and thrusting damage, gets some of the most range. You can go power sense this with a spiked spear with some like crazy ass blade type combos, and it's just incredible. Amazing weapon. Light attack combos can be a bit weird, but like the fact that you get some nice variety in either vertical, horizontal, and poking attacks means that you have a less chance of missing with just poking attacks. So you have the option if you did want to power stance, which is pretty cool. And obviously bleed builds are just broken, so. And with like spears, you can have a lot of different Ash of War options that you can equip onto them. Like Spectral Lance, which is going to scale off Arcane, and it's going to make it do some nice bleed as well. Not with the weapon skill, but with the weapon. Clayman's Harpoon is going to be another S tier. If you're going to be using an Ice Spear build, this is basically the weapon to use. Because Ice Spear is one of the best weapon skills in the entire game. It's like easily top 10 Ash of War. And Clayman's Harpoon is going to be the best pairing because it's a weapon that gets magic damage or magic scaling and can be infused. So when you go into a magic infusion, it kind of doubles down into that intelligence scaling. And it does like amazing damage. And putting it with Ice Spear is just going to make it do even more damage. It's just ridiculous. It's just stupid. And you can just get a couple of these things because you can farm for them. And you could have a very silly build. Very good weapon. Unlike the Celebrant's Rib Break. This thing is garbage, like all the Celebrant weapons. Awful damage, and the only rate, this doesn't get bleed, no. It should get bleed, because it looks like it would get bleed, but it's just like, why does this exist? And these have like 0.5% drop rates as well. Just get dog shit damage and just exist for the sake of existing. Get him out of here. Rune farm goes into the S tier. You literally get more runes trying to farm for this weapon than you would actually trying to use this weapon to get runes. Honestly, the torch pole is better than this shit. I'm going to put the torch pole into the D tier. Because at least the torch pole gets good range. That's the only thing I can say that's good about the torch pole. Damage, not that good. But at least it gets good range. But yeah, it's just like a weapon skill. It's a weapon that can't be infused. It gets stuck with like charge force. But at least the range is cool. Inquisitor's Grendel. Probably just going to go into the C tier. It's cool in the fact that it's a faith type weapon that can get bleed. But like, it gets like... It does get a B scaling in faith as well, which is pretty cool. But where's the unique skill? It's such a unique looking weapon and it gets charged forth. Why? Where's the unique skill? I'll subscribe if you read this message. There you go. I read it. I'm like reading the messages at the corner of my eye, but I'm not like reading them out and like communicating. So I can see what you guys are saying. I'm just not like entertaining the comments. Yeah, this thing should have had a unique skill. But yeah, the way it stands right now, if you want a faith type weapon that can get bleed, just go with like any other weapon that can get bleed and can be infused and just infuse it into like something else. Like just use like a cross Naginata with like a flame art infusion and it'll just be like better than this thingy. Anyway, the crystal spear. It's probably C tier. Not D tier, it's a crystal weapon, who cares? I think these get like an okay magic scaling and it gets like impaling thrust. So it's like, it's pretty decent. Like if you just want to get like a regular magic type of spear. But like, I'm not going to be favorable to any somber weapon that doesn't get a unique skill. Like if you're a somber weapon that doesn't get a unique skill, why do you exist? Like literally, like why? Like what is the purpose? I don't know. The rod and crystal spear is cool because it gets scarlet rot and it's a spear. So it can proc it nicely. My problem is that this one gets impaling thrust and this one gets charge forth, which I guess I could proc the status effect better, but I like impaling thrust more in average. But I guess it might be better for status effect procs. I'll put it to the B tier, why not? Out of all like the scarlet rot crystal weapons, this one's probably the best one. The clean rot spear actually isn't too bad. The weapon skill is pretty cheap. I think it's like 12 FP for Sacred Phalanx, and it actually does some nice damage. I don't think it gets hyper armor though. It does just do pure holy damage, and I think the weapon gets like a C scaling in holy or faith, so like it can just do some okay amounts. My problem with it is that it's always forced to do it in a horizontal spread. It would have been nice if you could like pick and choose like the clean rot weapons, like the clean rot knights do, and you can go either vertical or horizontal. That would have been cool. Another thing that would have been nice is if you could like power stance this with other clean rot weapons. So like if you pair this alongside like clean rot's like thrusting sword or some shit, and you could do some like unique power stancing combo, that would have been nice. But it doesn't work that way, so that's unfortunate. I think this one does get a unique heavy attack too, but I might be wrong. I thought it did get like the short spear heavy attack. I might be wrong on that one. It's been a while since I played with this thing, but I remember that like the weapon skill is pretty decent for how much FP that it actually does cost. And I think like the skill comes out in 2 parts. And if enemies like are standing like right in the middle, they can actually get hit by both parts of the skill, and it can just do like twice as much damage sometimes. I'll put it low A tier. I think I like it. It's not that bad. I still... Yeah. Not an A tier. B tier, I mean. High B tier. We'll see. Death Ritual Spear, though, is an S tier. This thing is really cool. Basically, the way I like to talk about this one is that if you liked the Falling Star Beast before it got nerfed, this one is going to be your better alternative, in my opinion. Because, like, it just does really good damage, and it goes pretty far. It definitely melts larger enemies, and it actually does some decent stance damage, too. It, like, stun locks them with every single spear. And if all those spears hit, I think it could do, like, upwards of, like, 40 stance damage. It's pretty good. Or close to it, at least. And the weapon actually does get a good dexterity scaling. Unfortunately, it only gets a D scaling in intelligence, and the skill does scale off intelligence, which is kind of annoying, but it still doesn't scale that poorly, so going into intelligence is going to net you some nice returns. And it does get the horizontal swipe for a heavy attack, like the Partisan and the Spiked Spear, so it's good variation in moveset, and it gets 110 crit. So if you do inevitably get the Poise Break with the weapon skill, getting a critical attack is just going to be even better with this thing compared to other stuff. Yeah, very solid weapon. I think very deserving of an S tier. And the Bolt of GREATSWORDS is broken. There are some things that are just like very easy to use, and there are some things that just do a lot of damage, and there's some things that just do both. And this is definitely that. Does a lot of damage, and it's very easy to use. There is probably like no other sniper in this game that just works better. You can just sit at very far distances, fully charge this bitch, and just cross-map enemies. And even if they try to dodge it, they're probably still going to get hit because the projectile just travels that quickly. Just going all into dexterity is going to make it do some amazing damage. Pair it alongside the Godfrey's icon, fully charge that bitch. And you're winning. And it doesn't even consume much FP as well, I think. I think it's like 20 or maybe 25. I forget. Why is it Dex? Yeah, if it was Faith, it would obviously just be better. I don't know, like I talked about it in today's video with like the damage type situation. Anyway, that's the spears. We're almost there. How long have I been yapping for? An hour and a half. That's not, actually no, that's been, I'm wrong, 3 hours. What the f? I talk too much. Anyway, great spear time. Oh, why do I yap so much? I have so many opinions. I need to stop. I'm dying here. Okay, great spears are a really solid weapon class. Piercing damage, once again, going to be really good. The movesets, they cover nice range. They do some good stance damage. The poise potential is really good. The power stance and combos are also very good. I just think that it's very solid overall. The lance is the only one that can be infused out of all the great spears. Hopefully we get more in the DLC. But yeah, this one's going to go into the S tier purely for that reason alone. Like the reason that it is going to be the only one is going to make it unique. Because there's so many weapon skills that you can put onto the great spear that's going to be best with the great spear. Things like maybe impaling thrust, spectral lance. These things are going to pair very nicely with the great spear. And the great spear and the lance actually does get really nice elemental scalings. So going into things like magic infusions or even a cold infusion, you still retain some very good scalings in all your stats. So I think this is just a very, very solid S tier weapon. One of the best that can be infused. The tree spear gets a cool heavy attack, and that is about it because it's a weapon that cannot be infused. Does require smithing stones, I believe, which is kind of stupid. Because you can buff it, but the thing is, its weapon skill is Sacred Order, which is a weapon buff. If it just had a cool skill, it would have been like one of the coolest weapons. But it has a weapon skill that is a buff, and the weapon can be buffed. But it does get a cool like double poking heavy attack, which is fun. Probably put into the B tier still. Is Bolt actually broken? Yes, it's like very easy to use. You don't have to engage with an enemy at all when using the Bolt or Grand Axe. Serpent Hunter. Probably has the best moveset in the entire game. S tier. There's probably nothing that has a better moveset than the Serpent Hunter. Like you get poking attacks, obviously. Another one thing I didn't mention as well is that you can like block and poke at the same time with these weapons, like you can with regular spears and thrusting swords. But yeah, the reason why the Serpent Hunter has the best moveset is because typically poking weapons lack in variation. But this thing has the heavy attack, which is a nice horizontal swipe. You get a jumping attack that's better than all the other great spears because it actually extends the weapon and like flings it pretty far. And then it gets the rolling and crouching attack pokes, which is the same thing as like the colossal swords. So like it just gets like everything. It's just really good. But yeah, the obvious downside is that it can't be infused or buffed. So like you're just going to get stuck with that strength scaling, and the weapon skill is probably just going to be outclassed by the heavy attack in most cases. But the weapon skill actually does do like really good amounts of stance damage. Like I think it does like over 80 stance damage for like the entire combo, and you get some nice hype armor. The obvious problem is that it's a really long animation, like really long. And it doesn't like get that cool projectile part like it does when you're fighting Rykard. I wish it did retain like at least a little bit of a projectile. It would have been cool, would have given it more of a use. But like if you have an opening, just use the charged heavy attack. As you're going up against an enemy that's weaker to piercing damage, then maybe. Anyway, Siluria's Tree. S tier. Basically, anything that gets like a projectile attack that can do some nice damage is like the recipe for success in like almost every single Souls game. Because like projectile attacks make the game easy because you don't have to engage with an enemy. You can just like sit back and just spam. You don't have to read an enemy's moveset. You don't have to dodge. You just spam. And the Siluria's Tree can do that really well. I think it's for like 20, 25 FP for its skill. You can fully charge it, pair it alongside the Godfrey's icon, cross-map enemies. It can go through enemies, do amazing damage. The uncharged version isn't that crazy cool. It doesn't do that much damage, but it is going to be like a quick attack that can stagger enemies nicely. It does actually get the cool heavy attack like the Serpent Hunter. Does that nice horizontal swipe. So if you're just missing enemies with like the constant poking attacks, you can just use the heavy. So it's good versatility there. It does get a good strength and faith scaling. So depending on which one that you go into will be dependent on which one does more damage. So going into strength do more physical damage, even with the weapon skill, Going into more Faith makes it do more holy damage. So if you want us to go with a more spell-based build and use spells, going into Faith is going to be good. If you didn't care about the Faith, then just going all into Strength is probably going to make it just do more damage in general, like a little bit more damage. And you're going to be doing physical damage, which is better than Faith. So, but you do have that versatility to go either way. But if you just cared about the weapon, just go into Strength. Anyway, the Vikes War Spear. C. There's not much I can say positive about this weapon. It does get some of the worst range out of all the Great Spears. It does get some of like the, I guess, like very average damage. It gets like an average dexterity and average faith scaling. Doesn't really do that much. It does get a unique heavy, or not the unique heavy attack, but it does get the horizontal heavy attack. Same thing as a Serpent Hunter and the Silurius Tree. So it does get the horizontal swipe with the heavy, which is cool. The weapon skill is very cheap, but I'm pretty sure it's bugged because it doesn't really do good damage sometimes. I've noticed that like against like, specifically like larger enemies, it just doesn't work at all. I feel like the AoE portion or like the explosion just misses. You could probably look at some of my gameplay talking about this. But yeah, I've been using this a whole bunch. It just like misses a whole, like the AoE explosion just like doesn't register and you're just missing out on so much more damage. I feel like it's supposed to do that big amount of damage because yeah, the damage output is not that good. And it does do Madness build up, and Madness is basically useless in PvE. It is primarily going to be a PvP weapon. So like in a PvE list, it's just going to be lower. So yeah. Unfortunate, but I'm pretty sure it is bugged. Because I remember doing a whole playthrough only using the skill. And there was times where it did like twice as much damage. And but like 90% of the time, it was just doing like very mediocre damage. It does like the same animation as Storm Assault, and Storm Assault can just be better. Anyway, Mogwin's Sacred Spear is yeah, broken. Top 3 weapon in this game. This one gets the most range out of all the Great Spears. It gets Bleed. It gets a really good arcane scaling. Gets a decent strength scaling, and its weapon skill is just broken. And Blood's Boon Ritual just rains a whole bunch of blood from the sky, does pure fire damage, melts enemies really quickly, and just does stupid Bloodlust build up on top of that. Like, it doesn't even need the Bloodlust build up, and it would still be like an S2 weapon. But like the Bloodlust build up just makes it makes it broken. And it stun locks enemies too. Like, and you get hyper armor. What? What? Anyway. Moving along. To the Halberds. The Halberd weapon class, I think is pretty cool. They get some nice range. Get some okay amounts of damage. I think that's the biggest thing is like their damage, their range for how much damage they get, and certain weapon skills can like hit at further distances. And you get certain polearm options, which is pretty nice. They're okay. In terms of like their DPS and stuff, I don't really care for them that much. A lot of other weapons can get better DPS. And their heavy attacks typically are like the spin to wins, which in the previous games I liked more. But in this game it was like a longer animation, and they don't really do as good as stance damage. I think they get like just as much stance damage as like a straight sword, probably just a bit more actually. But they do it in like a much longer animation, which I don't really like. But they get good Asher War options though, which is still fine. Anyway, the regular Halberd does get the poking attack moveset, but it's just going to be outclassed by the Banished Knight Halberd because that one just does more damage, and I think it's more range, so that one's going to go into the B tier. The poking attack moveset is like the better version of the regular Halberd moveset because piercing damage is better, and it does it faster, because like the downward slam horizontal combo, that one is just going to be like a longer animation. So yeah, but the Banished Knight Halberd is going to be a better version. Does the same spin to win heavy attack, same light attack combos. You can get an early like +8 version. You're going to get a +8 version very early on. So I think this is a very comfortable A tier. Pretty nice. It's hard for me to really want to use this over things like the Guardian Swordspear or the Knight Rider's Glaive due to how much damage those things actually do. Because in this game, obviously like weapon skill spam is the meta. And weapon skills are just going to be better paired with the weapons that just have more range and just get more damage. The Lucerne is going to be a weapon that gets piercing damage and gets like the regular Halberd moveset. So like the downward swipe and the horizontal swipe. But as I mentioned, the poking attacks are just faster and they also do piercing damage. And the Banished Knight Halberd, I'm pretty sure this does higher AR than in general than the Lucerne. So I think C tier is comfortable for this one. This one is called the Glaive, right? It's called the Glaive, I believe, pretty sure. There's no reason to use this over the Knight Rider's Glaive. Like, honestly. I think it's like going to be like a dexterity version of that. Because it does get the same like slashing damage. Does have like, it's lighter weights, lower requirements, but the damage is not that good. It's the same moveset as all the other halberds, so... It could probably just go lower B tier, I guess. The Vulgar Militia Shuttle is kind of garbo. I think the Vulgar Militia weapons get some of the the least amount of range. Some of the worst range out of all the halberds. And this one just gets pretty bad damage. I kind of think it does more damage around shields, but like it's because they use that as a trade-off. Like it can do more damage around shields, so like the base damage is like way worse. And it's like the Vulgar Militia Sword gets like the exact same moveset, same range, and just gets bleed. So yeah, this one sucks. This one's not too bad. Very rarely would I want to use the Vulgar Militia Sword because like the Grave Scythe is like another pole-arm weapon that also gets bleed and can just get more damage. So with certain weapon skills like Spinning Strikes or Stormcaller, this can be better, but there are certain skills that you can use only on their halberds that you can't use on the scythe. So, what am I thinking of? Things like Spectral Lance, for instance. There's a couple other ones that I'm not thinking of. But Spectral Lance is one. If you're going to go with like an occult type of build, and you want to benefit off like a good projectile. So I think Impaling Thrust, thank you. Yeah, the poking type ones, yeah. So yeah, that's going to be its major benefit, but in most cases, I'd still rather have the Grave Scythe, so I'm probably going to go with an A tier in this one. Higher A tier. It's pretty cool. Because the range isn't that good either. Anyway, the Guardian Sword Spear is going to be an S tier. This does get a unique light attack combo, that it is going to be faster than like all the other light attacks. Even like the poking ones, I think some of like the follow-up light attack inputs are actually faster. And the combos can be pretty nice going into like the running attacks, heavy attacks into the light attack combo is very nice and fluid. Still gets the same spin to win heavy. And it just gets the highest base damage. Like out of all the other halberds, this one just gets the highest base damage. So paired alongside certain types of infusions, this one can literally just be the best option. And it gets like a really good dexterity scaling too. It gets like an A scaling in dexterity. So yeah, this is going to be one of the best halberds. Very comfortable high S tier. Shit stagger potential though. Yeah, that's kind of my problem with halberds in general. They get like straight sword, they get like straight sword dagger sometimes. But like yeah, the damage and the moveset is really cool. Anyway. What are we doing now? I'm lost. Gargoyles yeah, gargoyle weapons are shit. They just get like, just as much range of damage as some of like most of the other things, probably even more damage in most cases, but like the range is always so bad. The gargoyle weapons have always just religiously the worst range, and it just makes me never want to use them because they never get anything else unique. It's like you get some decent damage, but like your range just sucks. And I don't really care to use it, even if it does do good damage. And then the gargoyle black weapons are just a fucking absolute atrocity to mankind. Why do these things exist? It's like a combination of bad damage, bad scalings, no unique skill, and holy damage. It's like there's nothing good about these things. It's like they're fine-tuned to make like the worst weapon possible. Thank you. Anyway, let's go talk about a good weapon. The Knight Rider's Glaive. S tier. Do I put it in the broken tier? I don't know. I might put it high S. I like this one the best out of all the other halberds. Because one, it does get the most range, and it can get the most damage, especially with a strength-based infusion, because it gets an S scaling in strength, which is stupid. So plenty of types of weapon skills that scale off strength, like Flaming Strike, is going to just best pair alongside with this. The Braggart's Roar infusions are going to pair very nicely. Things like Phantom Slash as well. What else was I saying? This does get slashing damage too, which slashing damage is better than standard damage. It does get bonus damage on horseback, which is very nice. And it does get the unique heavy attack to where it's like a downward slam, which I much prefer than the spin to win. Even though it's not going to get as good crowd control potential and hit enemies like multiple times. But if you want to poise break enemies quickly, having a faster charged heavy attack is just going to be best, of which the Knight Rider's Glaive just does do that. And if you did want to go with like, you know, crowd control and hitting multiple enemies or have a horizontal swipe, you could just use things like Spinning Slash or something like that. That could be nice. Yeah. I might, I don't know. I'm not sure if I put in the broken. We'll go reorganize it later. We'll see. Either way, it's still like going to be one of the best weapons. The Pest's Glaive is going to be another slashing type of halberd. Does get very average damage and average range. I think the benefit is that it gives you like... What does it do again? It's like more damage negation, right? It's like 2% more damage negation or some shit, like elemental damage negation. I don't know what the fuck it is. It's, it's something stupid. 2% extra damage negation. Yeah, cool. Thank you. I don't care. Probably B tier. Very, 2% is like nothing. It's very niche. You don't care. The Ripple Crescent Halberd is going to be interesting. As I talked about with the Ripple Blade, it's just going to be an arcane type of weapon that can be buffed, pure arcane scaling, so going into an arcane build and buffing it with things, with certain types of greases like bleed, sleep, or poison grease is going to make it proc it very quickly. So it gets some nice amounts of versatility there. Grease is going to be somewhat more annoying to try and farm, so it's not going to be like the easiest weapon to use. And in most cases in PvE, you're just going to use it for bleed, and there's going to be other better bleed options out there. Like if you go with a regular bleed type weapon with an occult infusion, it's just going to be better. But if you go up against enemies that are immune to bleed, but weaker to a certain type of status effect, then this one's going to be cool, so it has that nice versatility. So yeah, the Ripple Crescent Halberd can get B. High B. It's obviously going to be a PvP tool, so like in PvE, it ain't it. The Golden Halberd. Okay. It just gets the average halberd moveset. It gets average range. It does get really high amounts of AR because it gets a good faith and strength scaling, but it's holy damage, so like doesn't really mean much if it has high AR. If like against most bosses, you're just doing less damage anyway. And it is to get stuck with the Golden Vow. And the Golden Vow you can also get very early on in the game, like in the exact same location, and you can just put it onto a dagger and throw it in your offhand. So there's not really much of a point of this thing other than the fact that it's a weapon that you can get early on, a summer weapon that you can get early on. And yeah, that's about it. I think, C. I'm pretty sure the Asher War version of Golden Vow is 45 seconds, not 30 seconds. Because the only thing it has is high AR, that's it. But like you just don't get a cool unique skill. And high AR doesn't mean anything if you're doing holy damage. So yeah, C tier. Dragon Halberd. S tier. So the Dragon Halberd gets the poking attack halberd moveset, like the Banished Knight Halberd and stuff. So it's going to be like quicker than like a regular halberd moveset. Still gets the same spin to and heavy attack. Its weapon skill is a reskinned version of Spinning Slash. But it just does buff the weapon with Light Sting and Frost. It's like 160 lightning damage and 80 frost buildup. Actually does buff it on the first part of the skill, so you don't actually have to use the full combo just to buff it. And the first part of the skill, I'm pretty sure it's just like 11 FP or something like that, so you can buff it for very cheap, and just spam R1 if you wanted to, and it could just do some nice amounts of damage that way. If you do the entire combo, it's going to be very high damaging because it does a nice like Frost Lightning AoE. I think it's a very comfortable S tier. Loretta's War Sickle. It gets the same moveset as the Guardian Sword Spear, but it just gets a non-unique skill in Loretta's Slash. And you could just put like Loretta's Slash on the Guardian Sword Spear with like a magic or like a frost infusion, and it could just work better. Like honestly. Or like do the exact same thing. Or just use like a better skill. You could just put like Ice Spear or something like that on the Guardian Sword Spear, and you got yourself a better weapon. I don't know why some weapons with non-unique skills even exist. Does get some nice range though, I believe. I think it gets more range than the Guardian Sword Spear. But it does get like okay skillings. I think it gets like a C skilling in strength, dexterity, and intelligence. So your total AR is nice, but it just gets Loretta's Slash. So like, why would I use this thing? C tier as well. Sorry. The Commander Standard. This actually does also get the poking attack halberd moveset, and it gets the most range in class. And its weapon skill is going to be like one of the best buffs in the game, Rallying Standard, which just gives you like 20% more damage and 20% damage negation. And an aura buff, which is like a better version than Golden Vow, but it does only last 30 seconds. So if you did want to maximize your damage, this is going to be the best buff to use, although it is going to require like a little bit of strength and dexterity and then constant switching back and forth Just using it as a primary option can be okay and viable, but in a game where like weapon skills are like super powerful and you want to be able to use certain types of damaging skills, it's probably not going to be like the best option. So like I probably put it into the B tier just to use it for its buff. It does still work if you hard swap weapons, yeah, because it's an aura buff. It's going to be like Golden Vow. So it buffs you and your allies. Just how like the boss uses it. Anyway, scythes. Okay, moving along. Scythes, more polem weapons. I kind of see these as like just very solid. They do everything pretty good in terms of like range, moveset, stance damage, Ash of War options, but they just don't do anything like that good, you know? They're just going to be like overall like just decent. They're just decent. The regular scythe, they're all like somewhat useful as well. The regular scythe is going to be like your dexterity based one that can be infused. It's not going to get as much damage as the grave scythe. It does get a unique heavy attack and a cool double swipe, and that can be good at proccing status effects and maybe like the multi-hit talismans. The heavy attack is actually pretty fun to use as well. It is pretty good because all these weapons do get bleed, so it's going to be nice. But if you are going to go use the regular scythe, going into a charged heavy attack build might be the best thing. It's pretty cool. This is a PvE list, yes. The regular grey scythe I'm just going to like more, because it just gets the most damage. And in this game, having the higher damaging weapon, especially if it has like the similar types of range, is going to be better because, you know, weapon skill spam exists. And with the Grave Scythe, using things like Stormcaller or Spinning Strikes is just stupid. Like, this thing could output so much damage. If you haven't seen my Spinning Strikes Grave Scythe build, go check it out. This thing is just broken. Just pairing this alongside Strength build and Blood Flame Blade, it just destroys everything. It is just amazing, but it is still going to suffer from being like a Scythe with its like average moveset and not that crazy good stance damage. And Spinning Strike still doesn't really get hyper armor, so against some bosses, it might not be the most broken thing, but it still is enough for it to be an S tier. Yeah. It kind of just makes it like a better version of the Vulgar Militia Saw in that regard. The Halo Scythe is going to be one of the better holy type weapons in the game as well, because its weapon skill is a very solid projectile. It is very similar to the Rings of Light or Sacred Ring of Light Ash of War and Miquella's Ring of Light, but it's going to be a better version because it goes further, it staggers enemies better, and just does more damage for like 2 more FP. So it's just going to be really good. It's going to be a nice solid projectile attack that you can constantly spam. And the good thing about the projectile is that every single time that you swing it, it has like a little delayed effect. So when enemies try to dodge it, they actually won't dodge it, and they'll still end up getting hit by it. So it's pretty good. The only downside is that you have to farm for it, which is kind of cringe, but it's nice. It's nice. This is not an order, by the way. We're just putting it anywhere. We're going to reorganize it later, but yeah. The Wing Scythe, unfortunately, cannot say the same thing. It gets like the same animation as Loretta's Slash with its skill in Angel Wings. And Loretta's Slash I might just prefer more because it's a Ash of War that you can infuse. So you can put something like, you can put like a Frost infused or a Cold infused Loretta's Slash on the regular Scythe or like the Grave Scythe, and it just ends up being like a better version, honestly. But yeah, the whole purpose of this is to stop NPCs or enemies from healing, which is mainly meant for PvP, and it can stun lock enemies in PvP as well. But once again, this is a PvE list. It does do more stance damage than Loretta's Slash, so that could be like its specific use, but it's not really worth using over anything else. So I don't think the stance damage is that good to where I'd want to use it. So I put it here in the C tier. Because it still is split holy damage as well. One like annoying thing is that this one actually gets like a B scaling in Faith, and like the Halo Scythe gets like a C scaling. And like that one scales off Faith, the skill, and that one scales off AR. Wish it was switched around with the scalings, that would have been cool, but that's okay. Okay, reaching towards the end. Oh god. Whips are the worst damage or weapon type in the entire game. Whips are beyond awful. These things are very slow, like slower than like, just as slow as like Colossal, not Colossal, but as Great Swords, but they do just as much damage as Straight Swords, probably even less damage than Straight Swords. Obviously they have good range, but like if you want a good weapon with a good range, just use like a spear or something like that. They get some of the worst stance damage, like even daggers can get higher stance damage than whips. They can't get critical attacks. They get the least amount of Ash of War options. They get like basically no Ashes of War. None of which hit with the weapon directly. So these things are just awful. Awful. So every single whip can just go, no, not every single whip, but the regular whip can just go into the trash tier. It's a fucking terrible weapon. Never use the whips. The Thorned Whip is just going to be outclassed by the Hoslow's Whip, I believe, because this one just gets more base damage and higher bleed. I forget which way it is, but like, I don't know. The purpose of like the bleed-based whips is like the power stance jumping heavy attacks, but if you wanted to go with like a power stance jumping heavy attack build, just use like bleed claws, use bleed fucking twin blades, bleed spears. These are going to be like so much better, do way more damage. Like the whips do have really good range and they can stagger enemies nicely, but like the stance damage is not good. I don't know why poise damage and stance damage isn't like synonymous, but it just doesn't work that way. So I'm going to put both of these things in the C tier. I don't care. I should put this one in the B tier. The Thorned is better. I forget which one is better. Whatever one gets like the more fucking base damage or the higher damage. But one that gets more bleed as well, doesn't it? I forget. Either way, don't bother using them. Unless you like, you think they look cool, then go ahead. The Urmi though, this is the best weapon in the game. The Urmi can go into the A tier. The reason why the Urmi is really cool is because it gets slashing damage, which is interesting and different compared to like the striking damage that whips get. And in most cases, slashing damage can be better. But the best thing about the Urmi is going to be, well, two things. One is it gets an S scaling and dexterity. So when pairing it alongside dexterity-based Ashes of War, like Thunderbolt or Lightning Ram, stuff like that, it's going to make it do amazing damage. And it gets a unique heavy attack. The charged heavy attack, which does like this really cool like poke and like extends the weapon, and it just maximizes the range of the whip, and it does piercing damage too. So charged heavy attack builds of the Urmi can actually be very viable and have like amazing range. Obviously, it's still going to suffer from being like having pretty mid stance damage, and you can't do critical attacks as well. But yeah, the Urmi is definitely going to be the best whip. Solid A tier. The Magma Whip Candlestick, honestly, it can output some like nice amount of damage with its skill. It's just like, it looks stupid for starters, but you get like an okay faith scaling, and like the lava effects can actually like do some nice amount of damage. Like the Magma Blade just like works way better. But it does have like more range, and you can keep like holding onto it and keep stun locking enemies. And it could do some nice amounts of damage. It really can. It can just do more damage than the Giant's Red Braid. It could just be a better version of this. But the starting up animation might be a bit long. I don't know, it's fucking C tier, I guess. All I know is it's better than this thing. That's all I know. I hate this thing so much. People always asking what was like one of my hardest challenge runs that I've done. A Giant's Red Braid Ash of War run is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Mainly because that I wanted to like bang my head against the wall the entire time. This thing is so trash. It gets really bad damage with its weapon skill. Like horrendously bad damage, and it costs like 25 FP. If the entire combo hits, it can be okay damage, like at best okay damage. But the entire combo is so long, you get no hyper armor. You can't even cancel like the whole middle part of the animation. You can cancel it at the beginning and at the end. So that the entire middle part, you can't like cancel it at all. So you're going to get stuck there. You're going to get staggered out of it as well. The only good thing that it does do is that it does stagger those smaller enemies. So against like Millennia, like Knights, it does do high poise damage, not stance damage. That's different. High poise damage. So it can like stagger them and infinitely stun lock them. And you can like go through walls and shit. But like the damage output is so bad. 25 FP is not worth it. And it's still a whip. So shitty DPS, shitty stance damage, no critical attacks. Yeah, just no. No. The Mag Whip Candlestick Ash Ward literally does more damage. Does more damage. If I had like hyper armor, more damage, more stance damage, and do critical attacks, I might like it a bit more. So basically everything. Anyway, onto the fists. These are going to be pretty decent weapons. Yeah, pretty good. They tend to get very high stance damage, or decent amount of stance damage, but like they just tend to have very quick attacks. So they can actually just proc stance breaks pretty quickly. Their light attacks are very quick as well. Obviously, you can just power stance them by two-handing. They're very solid. Obvious downside is going to be their range, so it's not going to be for everybody. So if you want to have like easy-to-use weapons, there are going to be a lot other ones that are better. And also, they don't really get good Ash of War options as well. They don't really have much stuff offering for them. In most cases, when you're using fists, you're going to pair it alongside things like Crag Blade or Royal Knight Resolve. Stuff like that. Maybe Endure. But with the regular Kestis, it's just going to be a basic fist weapon that's going to be outclassed by the spiked Kestis. I can't even say that you get it like earlier on in the game because you can get the spiked Kestis like pretty early on too. So I was going to throw that one into the C tier because the spiked Kestis is pretty decent. It does get a cool like kung fu moveset with its heavy attacks. You can like maybe proc the multi-hit talismans because it does like hit one after the other pretty quickly in a cool animation. It's going to be hard to really recommend using this one over the Star Fist because the Star Fist weapon just works way better. So I might put this one into the B tier because the Star Fist also gets bleed. But you do get it earlier on though, so maybe lower A tier because it is really strong. Maybe B tier. The Kata, it's going to be a fist weapon that gets piercing damage. It does come with Impaling Thrust, but you can't put Impaling Thrust onto fists, so you can't infuse it with it at all, which is kind of stupid. It's going to get like the poking attack moveset, which is like similar to like the claws, but like the claws are just going to be better because claws just get bleed and they can get different Ashivore options. But it does get like the higher amount of stance damage, which is kind of cool. But honestly, if I was going to get this moveset, I'd rather just go with the claws. They just like work better. But it's okay though. I put it into the B tier. Yeah, the Iron Balls and the Star Fist are like both equally as broken. I'm going to put the Iron Balls like probably into the A tier because the Star Fist it's the exact same thing, but it just does more damage and gets bleed. So therefore, it's just a better weapon. But you get this one earlier on in the game. So you can use this one, be broken until you go get the Star Fist, of which is going to be one of the best weapons in the game. I probably put it broken too. Probably lower broken too. The thing is that I don't like about it is going to be its range. There's so many times that I've used this thing and I've just fucking whiffed. Even if you're pressed right up against an enemy, you'll still like whiff sometimes. Or sometimes you hit with one part of the weapon and miss with the other part. And you just do like half as much damage. But like, yeah, the reason why these weapons are broken is because their charged heavy attacks come out at incredible speeds. Like, they come out faster than like most weapons have their regular uncharged heavy attacks. And they do like 33 stance damage. And with certain things like the Axe Talisman and Spiked Crack Blade, these things become just broken machines. And it does bleed as well. So you can just proc bleed because it is hitting twice pretty quickly. Yeah, it's done. These things are broken. The Clinging Bone. Fucking trash. This thing gets splits magic damage and it gets an arcane scaling. Not sure what's really going on there. And it gets Lifesteal Fist. Which Lifesteal Fist is basically useless against 90% of the things in the game. And if you wanted to use Lifesteal Fist, you could just put that on any other fist weapon and it could just do more damage. Because it scales off your AR. And there are a lot of other weapons that just get higher AR. This thing does get some of the most range in class though. And it does get the poking attack moveset, which is pretty cool. Like the Kata. But you can just use the Kata with Lifesteal Fist and it just works better. If you wanted to use Lifesteal Fist for whatever reason. I don't know. Anyway. Storm Kick. Not Storm Kick. What's it called? The Veteran Prosthesis. Yes. It's actually worse called Storm Kick. But yeah. Veteran Prosthesis is also going to get the poking attack fist moveset. Actually does get the most range in class. Does get split strength and dexterity scaling. Can't infuse it. Cannot buff it. Damage is okay. Split lightning damage as well. The weapon skill Storm Kick is incredibly cheap. It's like 10 FP. You do this whole like stumping AoE attack and like this lightning follow-up. And it can get some nice damage. Now, there are plenty of problems I have with this. Obviously, it's Storm Kick and you have it on your fist. You don't kick. That's one thing. But why doesn't it get like Frost? Like, if like the first initial AoE attack got Frost, I would like it so much more. But the thing is, the lightning follow-up attack doesn't actually consume any FP. So that whole lightning AoE is pretty nice, but it is actually harder to control. And if you don't hit with it at point blank range, you're like missing out on so much damage. So like, there's so many things about this weapon that I'd like for it to be changed. It's never going to get changed, but it would be nice. I'm going to put it into like the C tier. It is like good damage to FP ratio for the skill, but it's like harder to use. And it should have had Frost. And then, I don't know, it would be a much better weapon. But it is like a fist weapon with decent range. It gets like more range than some of the claws. The Cypher Pata is going to be outclassed by the Coated Sword in almost every single instance. I think it does get the poking attack moveset as well, I believe. Pure holy damage, pure faith scaling, no requirements in anything else. So you can just go all into that one stat. It's going to pair it together nicely. But if you're going all into that one particular stat, you're most likely using spells, of which you're going to have a seal into your offhand. And to use fists, you're going to have them two-handed. So you're going to have to keep switching back and forth every time. It doesn't weigh anything? Yeah, true, but like, who cares? I'd rather, like, it's like 2 units of weight to use the coated sword. Just go spec into like 1 point into endurance, then just go use the coated sword. It's just like way better. Put it into the B tier, I guess. The grafted dragon. Oh, God. If it could just be two-handed, I would have just liked it a bit more. But there's so many things about this weapon. One, it actually gets the worst range in class. It looks like it should have the most range, but like that entire like dragon mouth model doesn't actually have a hitbox. So it has like just as much range as like a Kestis. That's one thing. 2, you can't two-hand it, so you're just gonna have to one-hand it the entire time. And people always tell me that like it gets like really good stance damage. I don't know who told them that it gets like amazing stance damage, but it gets just as much stance damage as all the other fist weapons. So if you have like a one-handed Kestis, it's going to get the same stance damage. So if you could just two-hand it, even if it didn't power stance, it's like two-handed like you can in Dark Souls 2, and it's like, do that shit. That looks weird. But anyway, it sucks. The weapon skill though. Weapon skill is not too bad. It's kind of like Cranial Vessel Candle Stand. You can just use it short range, fire-based AoE. You can roll out of it basically instantly. So it's very like risk-free. Does a nice crouching animation. The AoE itself is not that large. I don't know, I'll probably just put it into like a low B tier. Because like the weapon skill is pretty decent. Pretty cheap. Like it works. That's all I can say. It works. Anyway, we're at the end. The claws. Claws are one of the underrated weapons classes types in the game. They can hit multiple times very quickly. They get bleed, decent Ash of War options. Being that the light attack combos swing at the same time, you can use like the multi-hit talismans and stuff, and you can make for very solid builds. The hook claws. They're just going to be outclassed by like the Raptor Talons, because I'm pretty sure these are going to get more damage as well. Especially with those jumping attacks. So this is going to go like nicely into like the B tier, because it is going to be outclassed. The Bloodhound Claws, I'm pretty sure these get like the most amount of damage. They're going to be more for strength, and they can do bonus damage around shields and stuff, which is very nice. So I probably put these nicely into the A tier, although I wouldn't really use, if I was going to spec into a build with the claws, I'd probably just go into the Raptor Talons if I wanted to use bleed, because the jumping attacks are really nice, and the heavy attacks are just amazing, which I'll probably talk about that right now. Yeah, the Raptor Talons is a high S tier. High S tier. Those heavy attacks lunge very far, do really good damage. It does get bonus damage in jumping attacks, so you can go into a jumping attack build. There's so much versatility around the Raptor Talons that you can go any which way. Go into bleed, all into damage, jumping attacks, just spam R1. It doesn't really matter what you do. It's just going to work because they're just really good. Not broken. I'll think about it. I don't know. Like, there's so many good stuff here. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's still going to be one of the best infusible weapons in the game. Venomous Fang. This is like one of my personal favorite weapons. I love this thing. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is that all the claws do get 110 crit as well, which is pretty cool. Venomous Fang is actually the only one that doesn't get 110 crits, doesn't get bleed, but it does get deadly poison, and it can be infused. And with poison, it scales with arcane, and you can just go all into, you can go into the occult infusion, go all into arcane, proc bleed or proc poison incredibly quickly, and being that this deadly poison is going to be ticking for more, only lasts 30 seconds. You can use things like the Kindred of Rot Exaltation, the Mushroom Crown, and by the time that those buffs wear off, your poison is about to wear off, then you can just proc it again and just keep going over and over. You could probably pair it alongside a bleed build as well if you wanted to. Also has great versatility. The downsides of the Venomous Fang is that it gets the worst range and it doesn't get that 110 crit. But it still gets the same amazing light attack combos, the cool piercing damage, the cool slashing damage, great DPS. They're just amazing weapons overall. And that is that. How long did we yap for? I thought it was going to be like a 2-hour thing. I was like, I can just talk about this for 2 hours, then just leave. Thank God I didn't talk about the staffs and stuff. That would have been forever. 3 hours and 40 minutes that we yapped for. Okay, let's go reorganize this bitch. That's gonna be the top 3. That's 4. That's probably 5, 6, 7, 8. That's probably about right. I'm not too big on that. Maybe I put Raptor Talons can be kind of broken. They can output a lot of damage. Fuck it, we'll put that in the broken tier as well. have some nice variety in terms of broken with like somber weapons and unique weapons. I mean, non-unique weapons. Knight Rider's Glaive, Envoy's Horn. Yeah, these are all like high S tier. These are amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Probably the Ordovises, I like this one more than most. Rusted Anchor can go higher as well. As the Moonveil. As that one. That one can go higher too. Death Ritual Spear can go higher. Maybe about here. That's good there. I like that there. Yep, that's good. That can go a bit higher. Yeah. Scavengers can go higher too. Yeah, I'm going to post this thing on YouTube probably like sometime soon. This is going to be 3 hours. I'm not going to edit it. I'm just going to fucking post it. I don't care. We just did this to like have, you know, something to look back on after the DLC comes out. It'd be cool. I'm honestly not bothered to reorganize this. Either way, this looks about right. I could probably do this like list tomorrow and it's going to like look somewhat different.